Lower your weapons. Set down whatever you were carrying. Find somewhere comfortable, close your eyes if you want, and let Skyrim come to you tonight. Not the chaos of it, not the dragons overhead or the bandits at the gate. The quiet underneath all of that. The stories that were there long before you picked up a sword, and the ones that will keep going long after the last fire burns out. Tonight, we are going deep. 150 facts about Skyrim's lore, its history, its hidden corners and buried truths, and the wild, strange, beautiful mythology that Bethesda built over decades. Some of these will make you see the game differently. Some of them will answer questions you have been carrying around for years without even knowing it. And some of them are just genuinely fascinating pieces of a world so dense and so carefully constructed that you could read about it for the rest of your life and still find something new. So, settle in, let the fire crackle. Let Skyrim breathe around you. There is no rush here, no quest marker, no timer, just the world and the stories it is holding, and all the time you need to let them in. Section 1. The World Eater, the Dragon God, and the question nobody agrees on. Let's begin at the beginning, or as close to a beginning as the Elder Scrolls universe ever lets you get. Fact 1. Alduin is not Akatosh, and this distinction matters more than most players ever realize. When you first encounter Alduin at Helgen, when you watch him circle overhead with that enormous wingspan cutting through the smoke, the game frames him as the World Eater, the ancient enemy, the great dragon the prophecy warned about. And many players, and indeed many Nords within the game world itself, assume that Alduin is simply the Nordic name for Akatosh, the dragon god of time who sits at the head of the Nine Divines. They look at a giant black dragon associated with time and cosmic power and see the same being wearing different clothes. But ancient Nordic texts and Alduin himself push back hard against this. When Alduin confronts you at the throat of the world, he does not claim to be Akatosh. He calls himself the firstborn of Akatosh. That phrasing is doing enormous work. It positions him as a creation of the time god, as a being that came first among all the things Akatosh made, but not as Akatosh himself. The in-game book called The Alduin/Akatosh Dichotomy makes this argument explicitly, citing ancient Nord chieftains who held firmly to the position that these are separate beings with separate natures and separate purposes. Fact 2. What Alduin's actual cosmic role was supposed to be is even stranger than his role as a conqueror. According to the deepest lore of the Elder Scrolls, Alduin was not created to rule Skyrim or demand worship or build a dragon cult. He was created to end the world, not destroy it out of spite, but end it in the way a natural cycle ends. The universe of the Elder Scrolls operates in grand periods called kalpas. Each kalpa is a cycle of creation, existence, and eventual consumption. When a kalpa reaches its conclusion, Alduin was meant to devour the existing world so that a new one could begin. He is not a villain in the classical sense. He is a mechanism, a function. The problem that the entire main questline of Skyrim is actually about, at its philosophical core, is that Alduin abandoned this function. Instead of consuming the world at the right time, he decided to rule it. He demanded worship. He installed a dragon cult. He set himself up as a god-king over mortals. This deviation from his actual purpose is what the ancient Nords objected to. This is what the Dragon War was actually fought over. And when Alduin reappears in the Fourth Era, he picks up exactly where he left off, resurrecting his old army, feeding on the souls in Sovngarde to grow stronger, and refusing to let the world move forward the way it was meant to. The Dragonborn does not simply kill a monster. The Dragonborn corrects a cosmic error. Fact 3. When the Dragonborn defeats Alduin at the end of Sovngarde, the player does not absorb his soul. Every other dragon you kill sends their soul rushing into you with that distinctive golden light. Alduin explodes instead, and the words he shouts as he dies, translated from Dovazul, are a declaration of refusal. He is not accepting death. He is not acknowledging defeat. He is insisting that he cannot truly be slain, that this ending is not real. Some lore scholars interpret this as confirmation that Alduin cannot be permanently killed by mortal means. He was sent forward through time when the ancient Nords used an Elder Scroll to banish him, not destroyed. And at the end of Skyrim, he is defeated but not erased. The nature of what happens to him after that moment is left deliberately unresolved, which is exactly the kind of intentional ambiguity that makes the Elder Scrolls universe so interesting to inhabit. Fact 4. The Dovazul translation of Alduin's name tells you everything you need to know about him. His name breaks down into 3 components. Al, meaning destroy. Du, meaning devour. In, meaning master. Put it together, and you get something like Destroyer, Devourer, Master, or, in a slightly more poetic reading, the Master Destroyer who devours. Every single thing that name implies is precisely what his role in the universe is. This was not an accident. The language of dragons in Skyrim is not decorative. It was built by the developers to be internally consistent, and name meanings throughout the dragon lexicon reveal character and purpose with remarkable precision. Fact 5. Parthenax, the ancient dragon who sits at the summit of the throat of the world and serves as the quiet heart of the game's most interesting moral dilemma, was Alduin's lieutenant during the Dragon War, not a reluctant servant, not a prisoner doing what he was told, an active participant in the oppression of humanity who, by his own admission, committed atrocities. He was one of the most powerful and loyal members of Alduin's inner circle. His name in Dovazul means ambition overlord cruelty. The dragon you eventually meet, the patient philosopher sitting in the snow and meditating on nonviolence, chose that philosophy as a response to who he used to be. He is not naturally peaceful. He was not born that way. He is a deeply violent being who has spent thousands of years at war with his own nature, choosing restraint not because it comes easily, but precisely because it does not. That context makes everything he says to you far more resonant. When he talks about the difficulty of choosing right action over instinct, he is not speaking in abstractions. Fact 6. The reason Parthenax betrayed Alduin during the Dragon War is not entirely clear from the lore, and the ambiguity is intentional. Parthenax himself claims it was because he objected to Alduin's false claim to godhood, to the idea that dragons deserved worship simply by virtue of what they were. He frames it as a philosophical rebellion, a rejection of a premise he came to find false. But Nordic legends offer a different account. They say that the goddess Kine, the Nordic storm goddess who represents nature and the breath of life, personally intervened and sent Parthenax to teach the first human tongues. In this telling, his betrayal was divinely prompted, a piece of the god's own strategy against Alduin's deviation. Both accounts can be true simultaneously in a universe where mortals interpret events through their own cultural frameworks and where the divine genuinely does intervene in mortal history. What matters is that Parthenax taught 3 heroes, Gurmlithe Golden Hilt, Hakon One Eye, and Feldir the Old, to use the Thu'um, and those 3 were the ones who eventually banished Alduin. Fact 7. The throat of the world, Skyrim's highest mountain, is not simply a geographical feature, it is a wound in time. When the ancient Nords used an Elder Scroll to banish Alduin, the act created what the lore calls a time wound at the summit of the mountain. This is a place where past, present, and future exist in abnormal proximity to one another. The Elder Scroll used in that original banishment did not disappear. It remained at the summit, waiting. Because time functions differently at that location, the scroll is accessible to someone who knows what they are doing. When the Dragonborn reads it at the time wound, they are not just reading a document, they are inserting themselves into the original moment. They witness the banishment as it happened. They hear the shouts that were used, and then they can use those same words against Alduin when the confrontation finally comes. The mountain literally holds the memory of what happened there, and the right kind of person can reach back into it. Fact 8. Alduin's ability to resurrect dragons from their burial mounds appears to be unique to him specifically. No other dragon in the lore demonstrates this power. When the player witnesses Alduin at Kinesgrove, hovering over the burial mound of the dragon Saloknir and pulling that ancient body back into life with a blue light rising from the stone, the game is showing you something that only Alduin can do. The words he speaks during these resurrections belong to a specific aspect of the voice that seems tied to his role as both Firstborn and World Eater. This matters tactically to the main quest. The Dragonborn's strategy is not just to find and fight Alduin, but to absorb the souls of his resurrected dragons as quickly as possible. Every soul the Dragonborn absorbs is a dragon Alduin cannot put back into the fight. The war for Skyrim's survival is being fought on 2 fronts simultaneously, and absorbing dragon souls is as strategically important as any of the quests that directly advance the plot. Fact 9. Alduin was resurrected without his old memories. When he returns to Nirn through the time wound at the start of the game, he arrives disoriented and weakened, which is part of why he leaves Helgen rather than staying to finish the job. He needs time to rebuild his strength, to remember who he is and what he is capable of, and to re-establish his authority over the other dragons. The dragon who attacks Helgen is not operating at full power. He is barely operating at half. What the Dragonborn eventually faces in Sovngarde is a version of Alduin who has had time to feed on souls and recover some of what he lost. The fact that he is defeatable at all is partially a function of how diminished the time wound left him. Fact 10. The civil war that tears Skyrim apart at the start of the game was, according to the Thalmor, something they needed to happen. There are documents in the Thalmor embassy, accessible during the quest called Diplomatic Immunity, that reveal the Aldmeri Dominion's actual position on the conflict between the Empire and the Stormcloaks. They do not want either side to win. They want the war to continue indefinitely. Every soldier killed in that war is one fewer soldier available to fight the Aldmeri Dominion if and when the Second Great War begins. Every coin spent on military campaigns in Skyrim is coin diverted from preparations that might threaten the Dominion's long-term supremacy. The Thalmor are not passively observing the civil war. They are actively working to sustain the stalemate, and one of their key instruments for doing so is Ulfric Stormcloak himself. Fact 11. There is a document in the Thalmor embassy that classifies Ulfric Stormcloak as an asset. Not a friend of the Dominion, not someone who cooperates with them willingly. An asset. The dossier describes how Ulfric was captured during the Great War, subjected to interrogation by First Emissary Elenwyn, and was led to believe that information he gave up during that interrogation was crucial to the fall of the Imperial City. The document reveals, with cold bureaucratic clarity, that the city had already fallen before Ulfric broke. He never actually betrayed anything that mattered, but the psychological impact of believing he had, the guilt and the sense of failure, shaped everything that came after. The Thalmor allowed him to escape, established post-war contact, and have been using his authentic passion and genuine grievances ever since to fuel a rebellion that serves their interests perfectly. Ulfric is not a Thalmor agent. He despises them, but his sincere hatred of them makes him the perfect instrument for their purposes. He fights them with everything he has, and every blow he strikes does exactly what they need it to do. Fact 12. The Forsworn, the ragged fighters with their animal bones and bloody camps scattered across the Reach, are not bandits or random savages. They are the native people of that land. The Reach, the western hold of Skyrim with its ancient standing stones and its capital at Markarth, was originally inhabited by people called the Reachmen, a group with Breton ancestry. Nordic conquest pushed them out of their ancestral homeland, and centuries of displacement and marginalization created the conditions for the Forsworn uprising. A character in Markarth named Nepos the Nose can, if you listen carefully and complete the right quests, reveal that the Forsworn were actually in political control of Markarth briefly, having recaptured it while the Empire and the Stormcloaks were distracted. Ulfric Stormcloak retook it through brutal violence, and then, under Thalmor pressure, betrayed the agreement he had made to allow Talos worship in exchange for Forsworn support. That betrayal radicalized the moderate elements of the Reachmen movement into joining the more violent faction. The Forsworn you fight throughout the Reach are, from one perspective, terrorists. From another, they are an indigenous people who have been displaced, broken, and betrayed, and who are fighting with everything they have left to reclaim something that was taken from them. The game does not tell you which perspective is correct. It hands you both and leaves you to decide. Fact 13. The dragon burial mounds scattered across Skyrim's landscape were not passive graves. They were actively maintained for thousands of years. After the Dragon War ended, and the surviving dragons were systematically hunted down and killed, faithful members of the dragon cult carefully preserved the bodies of the fallen in circular burial mounds built specifically for them. These were not monuments to a dead religion. They were active sites of vigil. The cult believed, with total sincerity, that Alduin would eventually return and resurrect his army, and they intended to be ready for that moment, to have the bodies waiting and intact when it came. Some of these caretakers kept this vigil for generations, passing it down from parent to child, maintaining fires and performing rituals long after the cult's political power was completely broken. The Draugr that now guard the burial mounds are the reanimated bodies of these devoted watchers. They died in service and they remained in service, their undead existence a continuation of a commitment made in life. When the Dragonborn disturbs a dragon burial mound, the Draugr do not attack out of territorial aggression. They attack because they are doing their job, the same job they have been doing for thousands of years. Fact 14. The specific Dragon War ended with the banishment of Alduin, but the deep theological conflict it created has never fully resolved. The question of whether dragons deserve worship, of whether their nature gives them authority over mortals, of whether Alduin's claim to godhood was false or simply premature, runs underneath the entire narrative of Skyrim's main quest. Paarthurnax's existence at the summit of the throat of the world, and the moral debate around whether he deserves to die for his past crimes or deserves to live in recognition of his centuries of atonement, is a direct continuation of the questions the Dragon War raised. The Blades who demand his death are answering one version of those questions. The Greybeards, who shelter and revere him, are answering another. And the Dragonborn is forced to choose between them without the luxury of a clearly correct answer. Fact 15. Alduin's Wall, located in Skyhaven Temple, was built by the Akaviri, the Blades' original culture from the continent across the sea, after they helped defeat Alduin during the Dragon War. It depicts the entire arc of the conflict with Alduin, his original rise, his defeat by the First Tongues, his banishment, and a prophecy of his eventual return. It also depicts the Dragonborn, the figure destined to confront him when he returns. The Akaviri built this monument as both a record of the past and a guide for the future. They knew that Alduin was not dead. They knew he would come back. And they wanted whoever came next to have something to look at, something to point to, something to anchor their understanding of what was happening when the dragons began to return, and no one had any idea why. The Blades and their predecessor organizations kept faith with that monument through centuries of nothing, maintaining their readiness for a return that seemed increasingly unlikely, until the morning Helgen burned, and everything they had been waiting for arrived at once. If you are listening to this somewhere specific, or watching at a particular hour, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is. I genuinely love knowing who is out there in the world right now, letting Skyrim carry them through the night. And if this is doing what it should be doing, if it is helping you wind down or giving your mind something gentle to rest against, then please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it helps keep things like this coming. Section 2. The Dwemer and the question of what God-making sounds like when it goes wrong. The Dwemer, the Dwarves, the Deep Folk, the race that built magnificent underground cities, covered Skyrim in ruins that still pulse with mechanical life, thousands of years after their creators vanished, and pursued the most audacious philosophical project in the history of Tamriel before being erased from existence in a single, catastrophic instant. There is no group in the Elder Scrolls universe more fascinating, and almost nothing about them is fully understood. Fact 16. The Dwemer disappeared in the year 1E700. That is a date that echoes through the entirety of Elder Scrolls lore, not 1E700 approximately, not over the course of 1E700. In one moment, during the Battle of Red Mountain, every single Dwemer on Nirn ceased to exist. The historian accounts that have survived this event describe it with the same quality of stunned disbelief that appears when people try to describe something that should not have been possible. One account notes that the ruins of Bam's Amshend and Mournhold were later explored by investigators who found piles of ash on chairs, in beds, beside weapons that had been set down. Not bodies. Ash. The Dwemer did not retreat. They did not flee. They did not slowly transform. They were reduced to powder where they stood, their physical forms disintegrating in an instant, while everything they had built, their machines and their cities and their automatons, kept running exactly as programmed, waiting for masters who would never return. Fact 17. The sole surviving Dwemer in all of Tamriel is a figure named Yagrum Bogern, and he is only alive because he was not on Nirn when it happened. He was traveling in an outer realm, a pocket dimension separate from Mundus, when the vanishing occurred. When he returned, he found his entire civilization erased. Yagrum can be encountered in Morrowind, where he lives in a facility maintained by the Telvanni mage Devaith Fear. kept alive but suffering from the corpus disease that has grotesquely expanded his body and robbed him of the ability to walk. He is a scholar of remarkable intelligence surrounded by notes and observations he has been compiling for centuries, trying to reconstruct what happened to his people. His very existence is one of the only concrete pieces of evidence that the Dwemer did not simply die, but were removed from existence by something that could reach them everywhere simultaneously, except in spaces outside the normal boundaries of reality. Fact 18. The architect of the Dwemer's fate was their own greatest mind, a figure named Kagranach. Kagranach was the chief tonal architect of the Dwemer people, their highest engineer, and one of their most powerful philosophical voices. He discovered the heart of Lorkhan buried deep beneath Red Mountain in Morrowind. The heart of Lorkhan is one of the most significant objects in all of Elder Scrolls cosmology. It is the physical heart of a dead god, a deity named Lorkhan, who was responsible for the creation of the mortal world and who was punished for it by having his heart torn out and cast away. The heart is extraordinarily powerful, soaked in the kind of divine energy that does not exist anywhere else in the mortal plane. And Kagranach, being precisely the kind of being who looked at an artifact that had killed a god and thought not danger but opportunity, designed a plan to use it. His goal was to construct a mechanical god, a colossal brass construct called Numidium, and to power it with the heart of Lorkhan. By attaching the Dwemer race to this artificial deity, he believed he could elevate his entire people to divine status, bypassing the slow accumulated process through which gods normally come to be and simply engineering divinity from first principles. Fact 19. Kagranach wrote a book called Divine Metaphysics that describes his approach to this project, and it is one of the most remarkable in-game texts in the entire series. The book treats divinity as a technical problem. It discusses the nature of God essence the way an engineer discusses load-bearing calculations. Kagranach did not believe in miracles. He did not pray. He measured, calculated, and constructed. His worldview held that if you understood the mechanics of how divine power worked, you could replicate it through sufficiently advanced methodology. The Dwemer as a culture were deeply skeptical of the gods that other races worshipped, and Kagranach was the full expression of that skepticism taken to its logical extreme. He was not irreverent. He was simply unimpressed. The gods were not beyond mortal understanding. They were just complicated problems that had not been solved yet. Fact 20. 3 tools were central to Kagranach's work with the heart of Lorkhan. They are named Wraithguard, a gauntlet that allowed the wielder to survive contact with the heart's energy. Sunder, a hammer that could strike precise tones from the heart to draw out specific aspects of its power. And Keening, a dagger used to tune and direct that power with surgical precision. These 3 objects appear throughout Elder Scrolls games as artifacts of immense significance. In Skyrim's College of Winterhold questline, a man named Arniel Gain becomes obsessed with understanding the Dwemer disappearance and obtains Keening. He attempts to recreate the circumstances of Kagranach's original ritual using a soul gem as a substitute for the heart of Lorkhan. He vanishes, instantly, without explanation. His experiment proved that the tools themselves, even separated from the heart, retained some resonance of what was done with them, and the result was identical to what happened to his subjects of study. Arniel's shade sometimes appears afterward to assist the Dragonborn, suggesting that whatever state the Dwemer ended up in, he may have joined them there. Fact 21. The Dwemer were not mechanics in the way we normally use that word. They were tonal architects. This is a term that appears in their writings and in the architectural analysis of their ruins, and it means something specific and astonishing. The Dwemer understood reality as being fundamentally composed of vibrations and resonances, a kind of grand symphony of existence. By discovering the precise frequencies at which matter, energy, and even metaphysical concepts vibrated, they could manipulate them with extraordinary precision. Their machines are not powered by coal or steam or magic in the conventional sense. They are powered by sound, by resonance, by the right vibration sustained at the right pitch in the right configuration. This is why Dwemer structures continue to function thousands of years after their builders vanished, with no apparent fuel source, no maintenance, no degradation. They are not running out of anything because they are not consuming anything. They are simply resonating in the correct pattern. This also connects Dwemer technology to the Thu'um, the dragon shouts that form the backbone of Skyrim's main quest. Both operate on the same fundamental principle. that the right sound, spoken at the right frequency with sufficient power behind it, can reshape reality. Fact 22. The reason the Falmer, the blind, cave-dwelling creatures that players encounter throughout Skyrim's underground areas, are the way they are traces directly back to the Dwemer. But the story is not as simple as the Dwemer being straightforwardly cruel. After the Night of Tears, when the Snow Elves attacked and destroyed the human settlement of Sarthal, Ysgramor returned with his 500 companions and drove the Snow Elves out of most of Skyrim. The survivors, desperate and without allies, turned to the Dwemer for help. The Dwemer accepted them, but they made the Snow Elves pay for their sanctuary in the most permanent way imaginable. The refugees were required to eat a toxic fungus that grew in the deep places of Black Reach. Over time, and then through generations, this fungus destroyed their eyesight completely. Blind, dependent, and increasingly physically altered by their subterranean existence, the Snow Elves fell into complete servitude. The Dwemer then enslaved them, using them as a labor force in their most dangerous operations. What had been a proud and sophisticated civilization with remarkable magical aptitude was, over centuries, reduced to the feral creatures that now haunt the ruins their former masters left behind. Fact 23. Black Reach, the enormous underground cavern that players can access through the Dwemer ruin of Alftand, is technically impossible by any geological standard that applies to the world above it. Its scale, its artificial sun casting cold light across a space that should not exist under the mountains of Skyrim, its architecture suggesting that the Dwemer either found this natural formation and dramatically expanded it or created the entire cavern through means no one else has been able to replicate. All of this defies explanation. Even the glowing mushrooms that populate its darkness are not native to any known ecosystem on the surface. They are unique to this environment, possibly a Dwemer biological creation, or perhaps something that predates even them. The dragon Volthuriol lives in Black Reach, and his presence is never explained. A creature whose nature is the sky, whose kind ruled from above, somehow exists in the deepest underground space in Skyrim. He was apparently there before the Dwemer found the cavern, suggesting that Black Reach is old in a way that precedes even its most famous inhabitants. Fact 24. Before the Dwemer arrived, according to certain lore texts, Black Reach was originally occupied by the first vampire clans of the Merethic era. This places the cavern in a history that stretches back to some of the earliest periods of Tamriel's recorded past. Layers of occupancy stack on top of each other in that space. Vampires in the deep past, then Dwemer expansion turning it into a transit hub connecting multiple major Dwemer settlements, then Snow Elves seeking refuge and finding slavery, then the Falmer rebelling in what became known as the War of the Crag, a conflict fought entirely underground while the surface world remained unaware it was happening. When the Dwemer vanished in 1E700, the Falmer finally had Black Reach entirely to themselves, and they have been its sole inhabitants in the modern era, carrying the scars of everything that happened there in every aspect of what they have become. Fact 25. The Dwarven automata, the spheres and spiders and centurions that continue to patrol Dwemer ruins with lethal efficiency, are not simply machines. They are, according to some of the most intriguing lore theories that have developed around them, something more. The fact that they continue operating at all after thousands of years with no apparent power source, no maintenance, and no degradation already points to engineering that transcends what any other civilization in Tamriel has achieved. But some scholars within the game world have begun to wonder whether the Dwemer's project of apotheosis, of transforming their people into gods through the heart of Lorkhan, produced a partial result. Not divine ascension, but something else. Some believe the Dwemer were not erased but transformed, their consciousness distributed somehow into the tonal framework of their own creations, that what powers the machines is the same resonance that was once their people. This is, to be clear, speculation. The game does not confirm it, but it is the kind of speculation that the evidence actively invites. Fact 26. There is a specific Dwemer ruin in Skyrim called Kagrenzel, located in the eastern mountains near Stony Creek Cave, that contains something remarkable inside its deepest chamber. If you fall through the trapdoor into the cavern below, you can glimpse enormous bones embedded in the cavern walls, bones far larger than anything a mammoth would produce. Bones that, when examined in the context of certain apocryphal Nordic texts, appear to be the skeletal remains of snow whales, Nordic folklore describes snow whales as immense flying creatures that once inhabited Skyrim's highest peaks during the Merethic era. They were said to sing in magical tones, their voices carrying some resonance connected to the Thu'um itself. The Dwemer may have studied these creatures, or hunted them specifically because of their sonic abilities, looking for ways to apply the principles of tonal architecture to biological specimens. Whatever happened in that cavern is unresolved. The bones are there. The lore hints at what they might be, and the connection between those bones and the tremors that occasionally shake Kagrenzel's foundations has never been fully explained. Fact 27. One of the most haunting small stories in Skyrim's entire world involves the ruins of the Dwemer capital of Inchuan-Zel, located beneath Markarth itself. The city of Markarth is built directly on top of and partially inside a Dwemer ruin, and beneath the city's keep, there is a full excavation site that the Markarth Guard has been attempting to clear. The expedition that went in before the Dragonborn got there did not come back. The notes and journals left behind describe in increasingly desperate terms the discovery of still-functioning automata that the expedition was not equipped to fight, and then the journal entries stop. The Dwemer ruins did not become ruins in the sense of being abandoned and slowly crumbling. They became ruins in the sense that the people who should be in them are gone. Everything else is exactly as it was. Fact 28. The lexicon encountered during Skyrim's main quest. The Dwemer cube that Septimus Cygnus has been studying in his icebound outpost north of the College of Winterhold is one of the most sophisticated information storage devices ever created. It does not just hold data. When properly interacted with, it transfers knowledge directly into the user's mind, implanting understanding at a level that bypasses the slow accretion of study and practice. The ancient knowledge perk, granted to the player after transcribing the lexicon, represents fragments of Dwemer engineering, understanding absorbed through direct neural transfer. If this technology had survived in functioning form, it would have fundamentally transformed education and the transfer of expertise throughout Tamriel. The fact that it survives in only this single damaged form, held by a man whose obsession with the Dwemer has gradually separated him from ordinary human concerns, is a small and quiet tragedy. All of that capacity to share knowledge, reduced to one fragile artifact in the hands of one isolated hermit. Fact 29. The Ethereum Forge, encountered in the Dawnguard DLC's Lost to the Ages questline, represents the absolute peak of Dwemer craftsmanship. Ethereum is a rare crystalline mineral found only in certain deep deposits that the Dwemer controlled. It has unique magical properties that make it unlike any other material in Tamriel. The forge itself was built to work with this material, capable of creating artifacts of power that nothing produced in the Fourth Era can match. 4 Dwemer clans went to war with each other over control of Ethereum deposits, and the forge was hidden as a precaution against any one faction gaining sole access to it. The war that followed ended only because the Dwemer as a whole vanished in 1E700, taking the knowledge of how to find and operate the forge with them. The player recovering it thousands of years later, navigating the ruins of that interclan conflict, is descending into a frozen argument that was never resolved. Fact 30. The broader picture the Dwemer leave behind is not one of defeat or failure, but of ambition carried to a scale that reality itself could not accommodate. They asked the largest possible question, which is whether a mortal civilization could engineer its own transcendence, and they pursued it with a completeness that is staggering. Whether they succeeded or failed, or produced something in between, depends on which theory of their disappearance you find most compelling. What is certain is that the Dwemer are still there, in every still-functioning automaton, in every resonating stone of their ruins, in the architecture that refuses to decay, waiting in a state no one has found the language to accurately describe. Section 3. The Snow Elves, the Falmer, and the weight of what was lost. Sit with this one quietly for a moment, because it is the saddest story in Skyrim's entire history. Fact 31. The Snow Elves were not the Falmer. They became the Falmer. And the distance between those two statements is one of the most complete civilizational destructions in all of Tamriel's recorded past. Before the Nordic Falmer War, before the Night of Tears, before any of the events that players ever learn about in Skyrim, there was a sophisticated and ancient culture called the Snow Elves. They had magnificent architecture. They had a deep and complex religious tradition, centered on Auriel, the elven version of Akatosh. They had remarkable aptitude for magic. The last surviving snow elf, a knight paladin named Gelibor, who can be found in the Dawnguard questline, describes his people as proud and prosperous, a civilization that he compares favorably to the high elves of the Somerset Isles in terms of their achievements. Fact 32. The Night of Tears, the event that began the chain leading to the Snow Elves' destruction, was not simple aggression. The Snow Elves attacked and destroyed the Nord settlement of Sarthal in the Merethic era, killing almost everyone who lived there. For a long time, this was understood as an unprovoked attack, driven by fear of the growing human population. But additional lore reveals that the Snow Elves were after something specific. The Eye of Magnus, one of the most powerful magical artifacts in Elder Scrolls history, was buried beneath Sarthal. The Snow Elves knew about it, and they could not allow humans to possess something with that kind of power. The attack on Sarthal was not genocide motivated by fear. It was a targeted strike to prevent an artifact from falling into the wrong hands, with the slaughter of civilians being the collateral damage of that operation. This does not make it less horrifying. It makes it more complicated, which is precisely the kind of moral texture that makes Elder Scrolls lore so worth sitting with. Fact 33. Ysgramor survived the Night of Tears with his two sons, Ingol and Ilgar. He returned to the frozen continent of Atmora and gathered 500 warriors to come back with him. These became the 500 Companions, the legendary force that drove the Snow Elves from most of Skyrim. The Companions of Whiterun, the guild of warriors that the Dragonborn can join in the game, trace their direct lineage back to these original 500. But the organization's origin is not the honorable warrior fellowship the modern Companions present it as. It was founded as a retribution army. Its founding purpose was the elimination of the Snow Elves, and it prosecuted that purpose with thoroughness. The Snow Elves it did not kill fled underground to seek protection from the Dwemer, and that is where the second chapter of their destruction began. Fact 34. The last Snow Elf the player ever meets is Archcurate Verthur, encountered in the inner sanctum of the Chantry of Auriel in the Dawnguard questline. And Verthur is not what he appears to be. He contracted vampirism while serving as Archcurate, and was deeply bitter that Auriel failed to protect him from it. His entire project in the Dawnguard DLC is a plan of revenge against the god he once served, using Harkon's prophecy about the tyranny of the sun as a vehicle for his rage. He has been waiting in the Chantry for centuries, maintaining an illusion of piety while nursing a wound that has curdled into something black and cold. He is the last Snow Elf with his faculties intact and his culture preserved, and he has spent all of that preserved time feeding his resentment. Gelibor, the other surviving Snow Elf, calls Verthur's condition heartbreaking. He has been watching his last surviving kinsman for centuries without being able to reach him. Fact 35. The Forgotten Vale, the hidden valley accessible through Darkfall Cave in the Dawnguard questline, is one of the most visually and emotionally extraordinary spaces in Skyrim. It was a Snow Elf sacred place, a landscape of frozen waterfalls and ancient architecture that the Snow Elves built with obvious care and reverence. Walking through it, players are moving through what the Snow Elves built when they were still themselves, when they still had the capacity to create things of beauty and meaning. The contrast between this place and the Falmer encountered throughout the rest of the game is visceral and deliberate. This is what was taken from them. This is what they could have preserved, and they cannot see it anymore, literally and figuratively. Fact 36. The Chantry of Auriel was the largest remaining sanctuary for Snow Elves who had avoided both the Nords and the Dwemer, housing hundreds of worshippers at its peak. These were the Snow Elves who chose faith over compromise, who refused to eat the Dwemer's poison fungi and instead sought refuge in their most sacred space. They survived, for a time, but the Falmer, by then completely transformed and barely recognizable as the beings they had once shared a culture with, eventually found the Chantry. Gelibor watched them slaughter his remaining community one by one. When he uses the word betrayed to describe them, he is not using it as an insult. He is using it as the most precise description he has. They were betrayed by circumstances, by the Dwemer, by the grinding degradation of forced subterranean existence that stripped them of everything they had been. The betrayed are what they are because of what was done to them. Gelibor's grief for them, for creatures that would kill him on sight, is one of the most quietly devastating, emotional notes in all of Skyrim. Fact 37. Knight Paladin Gelibor has been standing vigil at the Chantry's Way Shrine for an undisclosed but extremely long time. He is not undead. He is not sustained by magic in any way he can fully explain. He simply endures, kept alive by some quality of the sacred space he maintains, or perhaps by Ariel's own interest in having at least one faithful servant remain. He believes Werther is still simply slumbering, still waiting to give the blessing that will allow pilgrims to complete the Chantry's ritual. He does not know that Werther has become something else entirely. When the Dragonborn reveals the truth to him, when Gelibor has to acknowledge that the last of his order is an enemy rather than a sleeping colleague, there is a beat in that conversation that carries an enormous weight. He has been holding on to one last thing, and that thing is gone. Fact 38. The Snow Elves had a society built around the worship of Auriel in ways that shaped their architecture at the most fundamental level. The way shrines of the Chantry were not just decorative. They were functional, magical waypoints that purified and transported pilgrims along specific sacred routes. The fact that they still function thousands of years after the civilization that built them collapsed is testament to the quality of the enchantment work that went into them. Every aspect of the Chantry was built to serve a purpose that outlasted the people who understood what that purpose was. Gelibor still serves that function out of faith and habit, maintaining rituals whose deeper meanings he may have long since worked through completely, but which he continues anyway, because the alternative is accepting that there is nothing left to maintain. Fact 39. The physical deterioration of the Falmer over their millennia of underground existence has not been fully reversed even in the game's fourth era. They are raiding the surface more frequently by the time Skyrim takes place, and some Falmer appear to be rebuilding rudimentary tools and structures, suggesting that the cognitive capacity they lost is slowly returning. Researchers within the game world have begun noting this trend with alarm. The Dwemer enslaved a sophisticated civilization, broke it completely, and then vanished before they could ever be held accountable. What they left behind, the Falmer, are beginning, over an unimaginably slow timescale, to put themselves back together. Whether they will ever remember what they were is unanswerable. Fact 40. The Snow Elf civilization's end is directly connected to almost every other major historical thread in Skyrim. The Night of Tears led to Ysgramor's return, which established Nordic civilization in Skyrim. The Falmer's relationship with the Dwemer presented the Dwemer with slave labor that fed their projects, including the work toward Numidium that ultimately destroyed them. Blackreach, where much of this all played out, is the setting for a significant portion of Skyrim's main quest. The Eye of Magnus, the artifact the Snow Elves attacked Sarthal to protect, is the focus of the College of Winterhold's quest line. Pull on any thread and it connects to this story. The fall of the Snow Elves is not a side note. It is load-bearing architecture for the entire world. Section 4. The Dark Brotherhood and the Theology of Murder. The Dark Brotherhood is, on its surface, a guild of assassins. But spend enough time with their lore, and you start to see something more interesting underneath. A genuine religious tradition that happens to express itself through killing. Fact 41. Sithis is not a Daedric prince. This is one of the most important theological distinctions in the game's lore, and one of the most frequently misunderstood. The Daedric princes are powerful beings who exist in oblivion, who have personalities and agendas, and who interact with mortals in very specific, often transactional ways. Sithis is something older and stranger than any of them. Sithis represents the void, not a void. The void, the primordial nothing that existed before creation, the fundamental force of change and entropy and dissolution that underlies all existence. Sithis is not a personality. Sithis does not make deals or give gifts or demand specific rituals. Sithis is the fact that everything ends. The Brotherhood's theology holds that death is not just inevitable, but sacred, that the act of ending a life is a participation in the natural order at its most fundamental level, an act of service to the void that preceded creation and will outlast it. Every contract the Brotherhood carries out is, from inside their worldview, a prayer. Fact 42. The Night Mother is not simply the Brotherhood's leader. She is its spiritual center and its only direct line to Sithis. According to the Brotherhood's founding mythology, the Night Mother was once a woman with 5 children. Sithis himself contacted her and made her an offer. If she murdered all 5 of her children, she would become his bride and the progenitor of a new form of worship. She accepted. Her village was so horrified by what she had done that they burned her house down with her in it. She died, and 30 years later, a man heard her voice. He became the first listener, the first person to receive contracts through the Night Mother's supernatural communication with those who performed the Black Sacrament. The mummified corpse of the Night Mother, which Cicero transports to Skyrim's sanctuary at the start of the Dragonborn's involvement with the Brotherhood, is the actual physical body of this woman. It does not decay. It never has. Something that persists in it still communicates, still passes along the names of those whose deaths have been prayed for. Fact 43. The Black Sacrament is the ritual by which someone calls upon the Dark Brotherhood. It requires creating an effigy of the intended victim from certain specific components, including flesh and bone bound with a specific kind of magical intention, and performing it while chanting the appropriate words. The Brotherhood does not simply receive any Black Sacrament. The ritual is designed to be difficult and specific enough that only someone with genuine, deep intention will complete it correctly. If you go through the motions without true belief in what you are doing, without the authentic hatred or desperation that powers the ritual, nothing happens. The Brotherhood hears nothing. This design serves a practical security function. Law enforcement cannot easily send an agent to trap the Brotherhood because they cannot replicate the emotional authenticity the ritual requires. But it also serves a theological function. The Brotherhood only receives contracts from people who mean it, from people who have arrived at the position of wanting someone dead through a path that is genuinely their own. The sacrament is as much about the person performing it as the person they want killed. Fact 44. Aventus Aretino, the orphan boy in Windhelm, who successfully performs the Black Sacrament and eventually triggers the Dragonborn's induction into the Brotherhood, is performing the ritual to kill Grelad the Kind, the woman who runs Riften's Honor Hall orphanage. And Grelad the Kind is, despite her name, genuinely monstrous. She beats the children under her care. She starves them. She tells them routinely that no one will ever adopt them, specifically targeting whatever hope they might have retained. Aventus fled the orphanage, broke into his childhood home in Windhelm, stole his dead mother's body parts to complete the ritual, and has been chanting in the dark for days when the Dragonborn finds him. He is a child who had exhausted every normal avenue of escape and turned to murder as his last remaining option. When players kill Grelad and return to tell Aventus, his relief is so profound and so immediate that it functions as a kind of moral argument. The Brotherhood did something good. Through a terrible method, for a terrible reason, using a terrible system, someone made a child safer. The game presents this without resolving it, without telling you how to feel. Fact 45. The 5 tenets of the Dark Brotherhood are not guidelines. They are absolute laws with a single penalty for violation, which is death. They are: never dishonor the Night Mother, never betray the Dark Brotherhood or its secrets, never disobey or refuse to carry out an order from a Dark Brotherhood superior, never steal the possessions of a Dark Brother or sister, never kill a Dark Brother or sister. These are read on the walls of sanctuaries and framed panels, a physical reminder of the consequences of deviation. Astrid, the leader of the Brotherhood's Skyrim sanctuary at the start of the game, breaks 4 of these 5 tenets over the course of the main quest line when she betrays the Brotherhood's location and membership to the Empire. The near-complete destruction of the Falkreath sanctuary that follows is, from the Brotherhood's theological perspective, not imperial aggression. It is the wrath of Sithis. Fact 46. Cicero, the jester-dressed keeper of the Night Mother's coffin, who the player encounters on the road and later in the Brotherhood's sanctuary, is the single most devoted member the Brotherhood has left. His journals, which can be found throughout his living quarters, document his transformation from a normal, functional assassin into the fractured, gleefully unhinged figure the player meets. He was stationed in Cyrodiil as the Brotherhood's membership collapsed around him. Members died or abandoned the cause one by one. Eventually he was alone, completely alone, with no living members of the Brotherhood within reach, no listener to receive contracts, and no way to know if the organization he had dedicated his life to still existed anywhere. He spent months, then years, talking to the Night Mother's corpse, not because he had lost his mind and did not know she was dead, but because she was the only one there. His madness, to the extent that it is genuinely madness, is the madness of profound, absolute isolation sustained over a very long time. The jester costume is something he apparently adopted during this period as a kind of coping mechanism, a performance of cheerfulness worn over something much darker. Fact 47. The Morag Tong, the assassin organization based in Morrowind, predates the Dark Brotherhood and is its parent organization. The Brotherhood split from the Morag Tong centuries ago over a fundamental philosophical disagreement. The Morag Tong operates within legal frameworks sanctioned by the tribunal, performing what they call writs of execution that carry official religious authority. They believe in structured, lawful death. The Dark Brotherhood rejected this framework entirely, arguing that true service to Sithis requires operating outside of and against mortal law, that death as a sacrament should not be restricted by the permission of governments or religious hierarchies. The schism created two groups with essentially identical methods and utterly different theologies. The Brotherhood's expansion across Tamriel in the centuries that followed proved that the freelance approach had its own sustainability, even if it produced a more unstable organization. Fact 48. Shadowmere, the black horse with glowing red eyes that serves as the Brotherhood's unofficial mascot and one of the Dragonborn's most beloved mounts, is not a normal horse. The glowing eyes and apparent near immortality, combined with the fact that Shadowmere appears in both Oblivion and Skyrim, meaning the horse is well over 200 years old by the time the Dragonborn rides her, point to some form of Sithis-touched existence. She cannot be permanently killed. She regenerates health at a remarkable rate. She does not react to her rider's crimes with the spooky alertness that regular horses sometimes display near danger. Shadowmere simply is, dark and calm and ancient, waiting by whatever pool of black water she has chosen to rest beside, exactly where you left her. Fact 49. The Dark Brotherhood's questline in Skyrim ends on a note that perfectly encapsulates the organization's entire ethos. After Astrid's betrayal and the destruction of most of the sanctuary, the Dragonborn can choose to rebuild the Brotherhood by carrying out the contract that was waiting, the assassination of the Emperor. This is not just a revenge or a financial transaction. In the Brotherhood's theology, the Emperor is Sithis' chosen target at this moment in history. Carrying out the assassination is fulfilling a divine mandate. The fact that it also provides enormous financial benefit and restores the Brotherhood to something like its former standing is not incidental to the spiritual dimension of the act. Sithis works through practical means. Fact 50. The Dark Brotherhood's sanctuaries are not simply headquarters, they are shrines. Every element of the design, from the Night Mother's shrine to the layout of the living spaces, serves a ritual function. The Falkreath Sanctuary, the one in Skyrim, feels different from the imperial sanctuaries described in earlier games, more domestic and less ceremonially structured, which reflects Astrid's personal style of leadership and her drift away from the Brotherhood's formal traditions. She has maintained the Brotherhood's effectiveness while quietly allowing its ritual depth to erode. Cicero's horror at this situation is not simple conservatism. He is watching the bones of his religion being replaced with something that looks the same from the outside, but has lost its actual animating principle. Section 5. The Companions, the Circle, and the Beast. Blood Fact 51. The Companions are older than the concept of Skyrim as a distinct civilization. They began in Atora, the frozen continent north of Tamriel, long before humans migrated south. When Ysgramor led his 500 companions to avenge the Night of Tears massacre, he brought a warrior tradition that predated not just Nordic culture as it developed in Skyrim, but the very idea of Tamriel as a human homeland. The Jorvasker, the upturned boat that serves as the companions' headquarters in Whiterun, is not a replica or a symbol. It is claimed to be the actual vessel that carried the first companions to Skyrim's shores. They dragged it inland and built around it, using it as both foundation and monument. A wooden boat from the dawn of Nordic civilization sits at the center of a living institution that has operated continuously for thousands of years. The harbingers who have led the companions throughout that time are custodians of oaths whose original context has been significantly obscured by time, but whose weight has not diminished at all. Fact 52. Kodlak Whitemane, the harbinger of the companions at the start of Skyrim's events, did not choose lycanthropy. He underwent the ritual that infected him when he joined the Circle, the inner group of companions who carry the beast blood, believing it was simply a tradition, a rite of passage. By the time the player meets him, he is an old man who has come to deeply resent what was done to him and what he consented to without fully understanding the consequences. The specific reason his lycanthropy causes him such profound distress is theological. Nords who die in battle are supposed to enter Sovngarde, the Nordic hall of valor. It is not simply a belief or a hope. It is, within the world of the game, a factual cosmological destination for worthy Nord souls. Werewolves cannot go to Sovngarde. The beast blood corrupts the soul in a way that prevents the natural afterlife progression. Kodlak has lived a life of genuine honor and combat and service, earned his place in Sovngarde by every standard the culture holds valid, and will be denied entry to it because of a ritual he underwent without fully understanding what he was agreeing to. His quest to find a cure before he dies is not about power or practicality. It is about dying the right way. Fact 53. The werewolf strain carried by the companion's circle comes from Hircine, the Daedric prince of the hunt, and accepting it creates a direct claim on the soul. Werewolves who die go to Hircine's hunting grounds in oblivion rather than to Sovngarde or whatever other afterlife would otherwise claim them. Hircine's realm is not necessarily unpleasant. It is a vast, eternal hunt, full of prey and weather and the satisfaction of pursuit. For some companions, particularly Ayla the huntress, this is not a horrifying fate, but an appealing one. Ayla explicitly states that she will never seek a cure, that she is proud of her lycanthropy and views the hunting grounds as a worthy afterlife. She and Kodlak are not simply disagreeing about a preference. They are disagreeing about fundamental values, what a good death looks like, what kind of afterlife has worth, whether power justifies its spiritual cost. Both of them are making coherent arguments from within their own frameworks. Fact 54. Vilkas and Farkas, the twin brothers who serve as senior members of the Circle, carry the beast blood with very different attitudes. Farkas, the larger and physically more imposing of the two, speaks about his lycanthropy with a kind of matter-of-fact acceptance. It is simply part of what he is, and he does not spend much time on metaphysical anxiety about it. Vilkas, the more intellectually inclined brother, has clearly done more thinking about the implications and is more ambivalent, more willing to admit that the situation is complicated. The difference between them is not a character flaw in either direction. It reflects the real human variation in how people process difficult truths about their own conditions. Fact 55. The Companion's founding as a genocide force against the Snow Elves is a historical reality that the modern organization has thoroughly buried. The Brotherhood of Warriors for Hire that now operates from Jorrvaskr presents itself as noble and politically neutral and fundamentally about honor, and in its current form, it largely lives up to that presentation. But understanding where it came from, understanding that its founding documents are also founding narratives of an extermination campaign, adds a layer of complexity to every conversation about companion tradition and companion values. Organizations outlive their founding purposes and sometimes become genuinely different things. The Companions have. But the transformation did not happen cleanly or honestly. It happened through the gradual forgetting of facts that were inconvenient. Fact 56. The Companions' political neutrality, their refusal to take sides in the Civil War, or involve themselves in the governance of Skyrim, despite being one of the most powerful organizations in the province, is not apathy. It is explicit founding policy. The Companions serve Skyrim itself, not whatever government happens to be claiming authority at any given time. This allows them to take contracts from anyone across the political spectrum without contradiction and ensures that the organization survives, regardless of which side wins any particular conflict. It also reflects a kind of humility, an acknowledgement that the Companion's expertise is warrior service, not political judgment, and that conflating the two would compromise both. Fact 57. The beast blood ritual that infects new Circle members is performed in a ceremony at the Underforge, a hidden chamber beneath Jorrvaskr where Hircine's connection to the Circle can be accessed directly. The ritual requires drinking the blood of an existing werewolf. It is a communion in the theological sense, an act of shared substance that binds the new member to both Hircine and to the existing members of the Circle. The intimacy of this is not incidental. The Companions are already a family by culture and practice. The beast blood makes them, literally, the same kind of creature. When Kodlak wants to be cured, he is not just seeking personal relief. He is separating himself from something that binds him to his people. The cure is not simple. Section 6. The College of Winterhold, Magic, and the Limits of What Should Be Known. Fact 58. The College of Winterhold exists on the edge of literal catastrophe. The Great Collapse of around 4E122 sent most of Winterhold into the Sea of Ghosts, when a massive portion of the city's shoreline fell away in a geological disaster. The college survived intact, floating at the end of a narrow walkway, surrounded on all sides by the ice and ocean below. The Nords of Winterhold, deeply suspicious of magic to begin with, blamed the college for the disaster. There is no evidence to support this. The geological record suggests natural causes. But the loss of their city, combined with existing cultural suspicion of arcane power, cemented Winterhold's relationship with the college into something actively hostile. The college has operated in this state of mutual resentment ever since, tolerated but not welcomed, isolated on its promontory, and increasingly self-referential. Fact 59. Before the College of Winterhold existed, there was the Mages Guild, an organization that operated across all of Tamriel and provided structured magical education and research on a continental scale. The guild's collapse before the events of Skyrim was not caused by any single dramatic event, but by accumulated corruption, internal political warfare, catastrophic magical accidents that destroyed public trust, and the inability of the guild's leadership to reform fast enough to save the organization's reputation. The College of Winterhold is, in a sense, a fragment that survived the collapse by being so peripheral that it was not caught up in the central destruction. What was once a respected continent-spanning institution is now a single fortress on the northernmost edge of Skyrim's northernmost hold, operating with the institutional memory of everything the guild once was, but the resources of something much smaller. Fact 60. The Augur of Dunlane, encountered in the Well of the Void beneath the college, was once a student named Dunlane. He was curious. He experimented with forces beyond his understanding. In a catastrophic accident, his body was destroyed and his consciousness was transmuted into pure magical energy. He now exists as an aware presence without physical form, capable of perception and communication, able to access knowledge in ways no embodied being can, but confined to a specific location and no longer able to interact with the physical world in any direct way. The college maintains his chamber partly as a resource, because his accumulated knowledge and his ability to sense magical disturbances are genuinely useful, and partly as a warning. He is a permanent living cautionary tale about the cost of magical ambition without proportionate wisdom. When he speaks, there is a gentleness to him that makes his situation feel more poignant rather than less. Fact 61. Ankano, the Thalmor agent embedded in the college as an advisor, is there specifically to monitor college research for anything that might give the Aldmeri Dominion a strategic advantage. This is not a secret within the game world. Everyone at the college knows what he is there for. The politics of the post-Great War settlement, specifically the White Gold Concordat that ended the conflict, included provisions that allowed Thalmor agents access to certain imperial institutions. The college is technically under imperial jurisdiction, and Ankano's presence is legally sanctioned. The discomfort his presence creates is not about his being a spy. It is about everyone knowing he is a spy and being unable to do anything about it, and about the specific content of what he is spying on. The Eye of Magnus, which activates during the college questline, is exactly the kind of discovery that the Thalmor would want control over. Fact 62. The Psijic Order, the mysterious robed figures who appear briefly at key moments during the college questline, are not affiliated with the college or with any current institution of magical learning. They are members of the oldest magical organization in all of Tamriel, an order that has existed since the Merethic era and possibly before any of Tamriel's current civilizations were coherent enough to have records. They live on Artium, an island that physically disappears from the world at intervals, removing itself from normal space to a location that apparently exists between here and somewhere else. When the Psijic Order makes contact with the Dragonborn at the college, they are telling you that what you have stumbled into is serious enough for beings who have been watching Tamriel for thousands of years to personally intervene. Their ability to freeze time and walk through the stopped moments while everyone else stands still is casually demonstrated in their first appearance and never quite loses its effect. Fact 63. The Eye of Magnus, the artifact found beneath Sarthal that the Snow Elves attacked to prevent humans from acquiring, genuinely defies classification. It does not fit any known category of magical creation because it likely predates conventional magic entirely. Some scholars theorize it is a remnant from a previous kalpa, a fragment of a universe that ended before the current one began. Others suggest it is a literal eye, a sensory organ of Magnus himself, left behind when he tore his way out of Mundus at creation. Its activation during the questline threatens to tear reality apart in the immediate vicinity, and the Psijic Order's decision to remove it entirely rather than allow anyone to study it further suggests that their assessment of the danger it represents is significantly higher than anything the college's archmage has expressed. Fact 64. Mirabelle Irvine, the master wizard of the college, runs the actual day-to-day administration of the institution. Archmage Savos Arin is nominally in charge, but his actual involvement in college governance is limited. This mirrors a common pattern in institutional leadership, where the nominal head serves as public face and political buffer, while a deputy handles operational reality. When Mirabelle is killed during the college questline, the college loses the person who actually holds it together at a moment when the institution is facing a crisis that threatens its physical existence. The specific way her death unfolds, shielding the college entrance with her own magical barrier long enough for others to escape while being mortally struck by the forces working against them, is a quiet moment of genuine sacrifice that the game does not frame sentimentally. Fact 65. The Atronach Forge, located in the middens beneath the college, is a relic of something much older than the current institution. It can be used to summon Daedra and create items imbued with Daedric power using specific combinations of soul gems and ingredients. One of its recipes requires a sigil stone, the kind used to power Oblivion gates during the Oblivion Crisis, which directly links it to the events of the previous game and suggests the forge is old enough to predate the college itself. The college either does not know about the forge or collectively pretends not to, maintaining plausible deniability about an artifact beneath their feet that can materialize beings from Oblivion on demand. Fact 66. The 4 masters at the college who hold lectures in their areas of expertise between 1 in the afternoon and 3 in the afternoon every day are actually doing that. Every day. If a dragon attacks the college or another sufficiently catastrophic event disrupts operations, the lectures are canceled for 24 hours before resuming. This level of detail, a scheduled lecture series that responds to world events and then reconstitutes itself when conditions allow, is the kind of thing that most players never notice. But it is doing exactly what good world building does, making a space feel like it was functioning before you arrived and will continue functioning after you leave. Fact 67. Ura Groshub, the college's librarian, has been accumulating books for the institution for decades and takes the care of those books with an intensity that borders on the devotional. He will tell you, if you ask, that books are the only reliable records that survive the things that people survive. Everything else, the oral traditions and the institutional memories and the personal recollections, is subject to the distortions of time and bias. Books that are properly preserved simply say what they say, unchanged, available to anyone who can read them, regardless of who currently controls the narrative. His orcish heritage and his library role creates a visual contrast that the game is clearly aware of and enjoying. The expectation of an orc scholar, particularly an orc librarian, is a subversion of a kind of cultural assumption that Skyrim makes a specific point of examining. Section 7. The Civil War, its costs, and the arguments that neither side can win. Fact 68. The Civil War in Skyrim has no good outcome. This is not a criticism of the game's design. It is a deliberate and carefully constructed feature of its political narrative. An imperial victory preserves the unity of the empire and maintains the framework that the world's best analysts believe is the only structure capable of resisting the Aldmeri Dominion in a future conflict, but it also enforces the White Gold Concordate's ban on Talos worship, which grinds against Nordic religious identity at a fundamental level and legitimizes the Thalmor's authority to police faith. A Stormcloak victory delivers Nordic independence and the freedom to worship Talos openly, but it severs Skyrim from imperial military resources, leaves a war-weakened province standing alone against the most powerful military force in Tamriel, and does exactly what the Thalmor were managing the conflict to produce. Every thoughtful NPC in the game who has analyzed the situation agrees that both outcomes are bad. The argument is about which kind of bad is more survivable. Fact 69. The High King of Skyrim, Torygg, did not die in a straightforward military challenge. The Nordic tradition of the Moot, the gathering of the Jarls to select a High King, and the tradition of the Holmgang, the formal combat challenge to resolve political disputes, are both legitimate frameworks within Nordic culture. Ulfric did challenge Torygg legitimately, and Torygg was honor-bound to accept. But Ulfric used the Thu'um during the combat. The voice is, in Nordic culture, a sacred gift. Using it against someone who has no way to counter it in a context that is supposed to test martial skill is the act that divides opinion about what happened. Ulfric's defenders say he used all the tools available to him, that holding back the Thu'um would have been artifice. His critics say he brought a force of nature to what was supposed to be a test between men, that the fight was not fair in any sense that the tradition was designed to assess. The political murder charge that the Empire levels at him for this act reflects the second interpretation. His own people largely believe the first. Fact 70. The Reach, the westernmost hold of Skyrim, has changed hands politically multiple times in recent history in ways that reveal the instability of Skyrim's political situation even before the main civil war begins. The Forsworn Uprising, the brief period of Reachman political control, the Stormcloak retaking of Markarth, and the subsequent suppression of Reachman rebellion form a compressed recent history of colonial violence and counter-violence that runs underneath the main Civil War narrative. When you fight Forsworn in the Reach, you are not simply clearing out bandits from a strategic location. You are participating in a conflict that has roots stretching back to the first Nord settlers, displacing the people who were there before them. Fact 71. Maven Blackbriar does not merely influence Riften, she owns it. The Jarl of Riften sits in nominal authority, but Maven controls the Thieves Guild's operations, maintains working relationships with the Dark Brotherhood, owns the Blackbriar Meadery that employs much of the city's working population, and has leverage over virtually every important figure, including the Jarl's own steward. She represents a political reality that the game is unusually honest about. Official power structures often mask entirely different actual power structures that operate through economic control, information, and strategic violence rather than titles. If the Imperial side wins the Civil War, Maven becomes the new Jarl of Riften, officially acquiring the title that matches the authority she has already been exercising for years. Her elevation is not a change in who runs the city. It is a formalization of what was already true. Fact 72. The White Gold Concordat, the peace treaty that ended the Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, contains a provision banning the worship of Talos, the deified Tiber Septim, the man who founded the Third Empire. The Thalmor's objection to Talos worship is not primarily religious. They dispute the theological claim that a human being can ascend to full divinity, because if humans can do that, the Elven argument for natural superiority becomes significantly harder to sustain. Talos as a divine being is philosophically threatening to the Aldmeri worldview in a way that Talos as a historical figure is not. The ban on Talos worship is therefore not about protecting Elven religious feelings. It is about removing a theological fact that contradicts the ideological foundation of Elven supremacism. Fact 73. General Tullius, the imperial commander of forces in Skyrim, is not a Nord and does not really understand Nord culture. He finds the entire Civil War exasperating in a way that reflects his genuinely foreign perspective. He is fighting a political and military conflict in a province whose cultural values, including the specific weight given to concepts like honor and worthy death and the significance of religious practice, are not fully legible to him. His strategy is coherent from an imperial military standpoint. His politics are clumsy, precisely because he is applying frameworks designed for Cyrodiil to a situation that requires different tools. Fact 74. Ulfric Stormcloak genuinely believes everything he says. This is important because it makes him sympathetic and dangerous simultaneously. He is not cynically manipulating his followers for personal power. He believes in Nordic independence. He believes in the right to worship Talos. He believes the Empire has betrayed the Nords who have historically been its most reliable military force. His passion is real, and his grievances are legitimate. The tragedy of his situation is that this authenticity, this genuine conviction, is precisely what makes him such a useful instrument for the Thalmor. You cannot manipulate a cynical operator in the same way. Cynical operators know when they are being used. Ulfric's sincerity is his vulnerability. Fact 75. The Jagged Crown, the artifact that both sides seek early in the Civil War questline, predates the concept of a unified Skyrim. It is a symbol of power from the Merethic era, when rival clans fought for dominance before any single authority had consolidated control over the province. Whoever holds it can claim a connection to that pre-imperial, pre-unified Nordic past, which is exactly the kind of symbolic authority that matters in a conflict where both sides are arguing about authentic Nordic identity. The crown itself has been lost for millennia. Recovering it from the ancient ruins where it was buried requires finding a time when the past can be accessed, which the crown's original owner would have found poetically appropriate. Section 8. Daedric Princes, Their Gifts, and What They Actually Cost. Fact 76. There are 16 Daedric Princes, and each controls their own plane of oblivion. These are not simply kingdoms. They are entire realities shaped by the personality and sphere of their controlling prince. Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha is an infinite library that also functions as a place of horror, endless knowledge without the context needed to use it sanely. Mehrunes Dagon's Deadlands are a volcanic hellscape of destruction and revolutionary energy. Sheogorath's Shivering Isles are a place of colorful madness, organized according to a logic that is internally consistent but deeply alien. Meridia's realm is brilliant light, sterile and uncompromising. Nocturnal's Evergloam is a place of perpetual dusk and mysteries that never fully resolve. Each of these realms is, in some sense, a self-portrait. If you want to understand a Daedric prince, the best approach is to look carefully at the world they built. Fact 77. Meridia, the Daedric Prince of Life and Light, whose shrine quest has players retrieve Dawnbreaker, was not originally a Daedric prince. She was one of the Magna Gae, the divine beings who fled Mundus during its creation when they realized the act of building the mortal world was consuming their divine essence. The Magna Gae who escaped became the stars, their exit from Mundus creating the punctures in reality through which Aetherius bleeds magical energy into the world. Meridia did not quite follow that path. She became fascinated with mortal existence and chose to remain involved with the world, which other deities considered a departure from expected behavior severe enough that she was eventually cast out of the company of the Magna Gae. She ended up in a liminal position, neither fully Aedric nor traditionally Daedric, which is why her portfolio, Life and Light, and opposition to undeath, feels philosophically different from other Daedric princes. She is not working against mortals, but she is absolutely not soft about it. Her methods can be as ruthless as any other prince, and her hatred of undeath is fanatical in a way that makes her dangerous to anything in its path, including mortals who happen to be nearby. Fact 78. The Ebony Blade, Mephalah's artifact, does not simply kill. It feeds on betrayal. Specifically, it grows more powerful when used to murder people who trust and care about the wielder. Friends, followers, spouses, allies. The blade's enchantment identifies the emotional quality of the relationship and uses it as fuel. This design is a direct expression of Mephalah's nature as the Daedric prince of secrets, lies, and manipulation. The weapon does not reward honest violence. It rewards the specific act of turning on someone who trusted you. To fully power the Ebony Blade, a player must make a series of decisions that progressively compromise their character, using the intimacy of their relationships as a resource. The game is asking you whether you will do this. It makes the blade available and tells you how it works and waits to see what you choose. Fact 79. Hermaeus Mora collects knowledge rather than souls in the conventional sense, but the distinction is perhaps less meaningful than it sounds. His servants, the Seekers and Lurkers who patrol Apocrypha, exist in a state of having given so much of themselves to the accumulation of knowledge in Mora's library that they are not entirely themselves anymore. The black books that serve as portals to Apocrypha are themselves a form of trap. Reading them is addictive and transformative. Players who enter Apocrypha during the Dragonborn DLC encounter Mirok, the original Dragonborn, who has been in Mora's realm for thousands of years. He is still functionally himself, still capable of independent thought and ambition, which is how Mora prefers his more significant acquisitions. A puppet is less interesting than a scholar who believes they are operating freely. Fact 80. Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness encountered in the quest's The Mind of Madness is almost certainly not the original Sheogorath. Evidence scattered throughout his dialogue and the structure of the Shivering Isles questline from the previous game strongly suggests that the Sheogorath in Skyrim is the hero of Kvatch, the protagonist of Oblivion's Shivering Isles DLC. At the end of that expansion, the hero performs an act called mantling, becoming an entity so completely and convincingly that reality cannot distinguish the copy from the original. The hero became Sheogorath. The previous Sheogorath became Jigalag, the Prince of Order who had been cursed into the form of madness. And the hero filled the vacated role with such totality that the cosmos accepted the substitution as genuine. The Sheogorath in Skyrim who makes wry comments about cheese and uses the phrase by Azura in a way that strongly implies personal experience with her is a mortal person who achieved apotheosis by becoming something so completely that the universe agreed. Fact 81, Molag Bal created vampirism. The Daedric Prince of Domination and Enslavement, whose sphere covers the subjugation of the will and the corruption of souls, created the vampiric condition as an act of violation against the natural order of mortality. The origin story involves a mortal woman who was subjected to Molag Bal's power and transformed into something that feeds on others while being permanently separated from the light and warmth of mortal existence. This origin makes vampirism, philosophically, a condition rooted in violation. Every vampire is, in some sense, carrying the mark of Molag Bal's original crime. The elder vampire bloodlines, including the Volkihar clan encountered in the Dawnguard DLC, trace their lineage closer to the source and carry more of Molag Bal's power as a result. Fact 82. Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Night and Luck, has a working relationship with the Thieves' Guild that has persisted across generations. The Skeleton Key, her artifact, kept the guild prosperous through supernatural luck when it was in their possession. Mercer Frey's theft of the key was not just a crime against the guild, it was a severing of the divine connection that made the guild's continued existence viable. The questline to recover the key and return it to Nocturnal's realm is not simply about defeating a corrupt leader. It is about restoring a compact between mortals and a Daedric prince that the guild has been relying on for decades without fully understanding what would happen if it was broken. The Nightingales, the guild's secret inner circle who serve Nocturnal directly, give up their souls to the Evergloam upon death in exchange for Nocturnal's favor while living. This is the actual cost of the guild's success. The most elite members trade their afterlife for supernatural protection. Fact 83. The Rueful Axe, obtained from Clavicus Vile's questline if a player makes a specific choice, does not count toward the achievement for collecting all 16 Daedric artifacts. This is deliberate design reflecting the nature of the quest. Clavicus Vile is the prince of bargains and trickery. The questline offers the player a choice between the obviously powerful artifact, his mask, and what appears to be an impressive but ultimately inferior weapon. Choosing the axe means being tricked. The game is making a mechanical statement about the nature of Daedric bargains. If you are not paying careful attention to what the prince actually wants versus what they offer you, you will consistently end up with the worst deal. Fact 84. Namira, the Daedric Prince of Darkness and the Ancient Darkness who is associated with things that disgust and repel mortals, rewards her champions with the Ring of Namira, which increases stamina and allows the wielder to feed on corpses for health regeneration. Her questline culminates in a cannibalistic feast in the Hall of the Dead in Markarth. The mechanical function of the ring, the actual health benefit of eating corpses, is designed to make cannibalism genuinely useful during gameplay, creating a situation where the most rational tactical choice is also the most morally troubling one. Namira does not demand horror for its own sake. She demands that you cross a boundary, that you demonstrate your willingness to transgress a taboo that most mortals treat as absolute. The players who complete her quest and use the ring are, in some small way, Namira's champions, regardless of whether they think of themselves that way. Fact 85. The Soul Cairn, the realm of oblivion encountered in the Dawnguard DLC, is not ruled by a Daedric prince. It is governed by entities called the Ideal Masters, who were once powerful mortal mages who sought immortality and achieved something that resembles it in the worst possible way. They divested themselves of their physical forms and became abstract entities of pure will, and then created the Soul Cairn as their domain. They collect souls trapped in black soul gems, using those souls as their primary resource and population. The implications for every player who has ever used a soul trap spell and then expended a black soul gem to enchant a weapon are not comfortable. The people whose souls powered those enchantments ended up in the Soul Cairn, a gray and desolate wasteland populated by shades who gradually lose the memories of the lives they used to have. Enchanting a weapon with a grand soul gem is not just a game mechanic. It is, within the fiction of the world, an act of permanent spiritual violence against a specific person. Section 9. Hidden Worlds, Developer Secrets, and the Details Nobody Mentions. Fact 86. Skyrim's map is a live, real-time, three-dimensional rendering of the actual game world seen from above. When players open the map, they are not looking at a pre-rendered image or a static illustration. They are looking at a processed view of the game environment in its current state. This means that dramatic magical effects happening in the world appear on the map. Absorbing a dragon soul creates a visible glow at your location. Major spell effects can be spotted from map view. Weather systems that affect the world affect the map's appearance. The map shows day and night cycles because it is literally looking down at the actual game world in real time. This is not something most players ever notice, but it is an extraordinary technical commitment to the consistency between gameplay and interface. Fact 87. There is a notched pickaxe at the very summit of the throat of the world. It is named after Marcus Persson, better known as Notch, the creator of Minecraft. Both Skyrim and Minecraft were released in 2011, and Bethesda's decision to place this hidden tribute at the highest point in the entire game, a location that requires navigation beyond the normal playable space to reach, was a gesture of respect between gaming communities at a moment when both games were defining what an open-world experience could be. The pickaxe has modest but functional stats and a unique enchantment. Reaching it requires knowing where to look, and being willing to push beyond where the game usually lets you go. Fact 88. Every major merchant in Skyrim has an invisible chest buried somewhere in the game world that physically contains their inventory. This is not stored in abstract data. The items literally exist in containers placed in specific locations, beneath or outside the playable map. The easiest of these to access is in Dawnstar, near the Ironbreaker mine, where a buried chest belonging to the Khajiit caravan merchants can be reached through terrain manipulation that the game's geometry accidentally permits. This was not an intentional feature. It is an unintentional window into how the game manages NPC inventories, a concrete object-based system that happens to have a physical manifestation that players can sometimes access if they know where to look. Fact 89. The Headless Horseman appears on Skyrim's roads at night. He rides silently, sometimes visible from great distances as a ghostly shape moving through the darkness. And he is always going in the direction of Homvir's Rest, a small Nordic tomb northeast of Whiterun. He does not attack, does not interact, does not respond to being spoken to or struck. He simply rides. Following him leads to the tomb, but no quest activates, no explanation is given, and no obvious purpose for his existence is offered. He is pure atmosphere. A ghost who does not need a story because his visual impact is complete without one. He is one of those details that players stumble on years after completing everything else the game has to offer. Fact 90. Eric the Slayer, a farm boy in Rorikstead who dreams of becoming an adventurer and whom the player can help equip and hire as a follower, is a memorial. He is named after Eric West, a Skyrim fan who died of cancer before the game's release. His family contacted Bethesda, and the developers created this character in his honor. Eric is not an essential NPC. He can be killed. Players who keep him alive and protect him through years of playthroughs have sometimes described that care as a conscious act of preservation, a small way of keeping something of who he was meant to honor alive in the world where he was placed. Fact 91. The lusty Argonian Maid, the notorious in-game book that appears throughout Skyrim in locations ranging from noble households to bandit camps, was written by a character named Crassus Curio, who appears as an actual NPC in the Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind. Its presence in Skyrim, 2 centuries after the events of Morrowind, suggests that it achieved genuine cultural persistence across the time period between the two games. The book's inclusion in every stratum of Skyrim society, from the highest born to the criminal underclass, is Bethesda quietly arguing that erotic literature has always been popular, regardless of who officially disapproves of it. and that great works of their particular genre achieve the same kind of immortality that respectable literature claims to pursue. Fact 92. Shadow marks, the symbolic language used by the Thieves Guild to mark buildings and locations of interest, appear on structures throughout Skyrim's cities. They indicate safe houses, dangerous locations, buildings that have already been robbed, and locations of hidden value, all in a symbolic code that is completely invisible to anyone who does not know what to look for. Only guild members are meant to read them. They function as an invisible layer of information infrastructure spread across every major settlement, demonstrating the guild's reach and operational sophistication in a way that is more impressive, precisely because it goes completely unnoticed by the population it operates within. Fact 93. There is a giant in Skyrim who is mourning a dead mammoth near Broken Tower Redoubt. He stands over the mammoth's corpse and does not attack unless provoked. Giants and mammoths maintain symbiotic herding relationships throughout Skyrim, and this particular giant has lost his companion. If the player approaches without aggression and leaves without engaging, the giant continues his vigil. Days later, players who return report that he is either still there or cycles back periodically, maintaining an informal memorial. This is one of the smallest and most quietly devastating examples of environmental storytelling in the game. The giant is not a side quest. He is not a combat encounter. He is just a person who lost someone and is not ready to stop being near them yet. Fact 94. The Argonians' reproductive biology is directly connected to the Hist, the mysterious trees that are sacred to their culture and that predate most of Tamriel's known civilizations. Without access to Hist sap at specific developmental stages, Argonian eggs cannot properly develop. The Hist do not simply live alongside Argonians in a cultural relationship. They are biologically essential to the continuation of the species. The Hist themselves appear to have existed before the world took its current form, and communicate with Argonians through dreams and visions in ways that non-Argonians cannot access or fully understand. This biological dependency means that the fate of the Argonian people and the fate of the Hist trees are bound together in a way that has no real parallel among Tamriel's other races. Fact 95. Maik the Liar, the wandering Khajiit who appears in multiple Elder Scrolls games, delivering cryptic or self-referential commentary, is Bethesda's self-insertion character. His dialogue is specifically designed to reference features removed from earlier games, address common player complaints, and comment on the game's design decisions in ways that maintain plausible deniability through his established reputation for unreliability. When he mentions dragons flying backward, he is referencing an actual patching issue. When he mentions never finding certain items, he is referencing features that were cut during development. Nothing he says has to be true, which means everything he says can be true. His appearance in multiple games raises its own internal lore question, to which there is no canonical answer, about whether there are many Khajiit who share this name and role, or whether this specific Maik has an impossibly long life by some means the game declines to explain. Fact 96. The White Gold Tower, the enormous imperial structure at the center of Cyrodiil's imperial city, is visible from Skyrim. If players rotate the game's map to look south, a simplified version of Oblivion's game world is visible on Skyrim's map, with the tower rising from it. This is not an Easter egg in the traditional sense. It is actual game geography. Bethesda built a simplified version of Cyrodiil into Skyrim's map space, as a recognition that the two provinces exist in the same continuous world. Using console commands to cross the invisible boundary and move south into that space reveals a roughly rendered but recognizable version of the Imperial City landmark, existing just beyond the fog of Skyrim's playable boundary. Fact 97. The gourds that appear scattered throughout Skyrim, and which have become famous for their strange physics behavior, are modeled on a real plant variety called cucuzza squash, a gourd native to the Mediterranean region and Sicily that has a distinctive elongated shape. Bethesda's art team studied actual gourd varieties to create Skyrim's version, meaning that the vegetable that players have been using as an improvised physics projectile and launching down mountainsides with fire breath for over a decade has a real-world counterpart growing in Italian gardens. The physics behavior itself, the wobbling and the launching and the general chaos, is not a feature. It is a consequence of the game engine's attempt to handle an oddly shaped object through its standard physics system. Fact 98. The sleeping tree near Whiterun, the strange pale organism with glowing sap that a giant named Nori guards with unusual ferocity, is not actually a tree. Investigation of the surrounding area, combined with in-game texts, suggests that it is some kind of extraterrestrial object or organism that fell from above. The area around it contains organic material, unlike anything native to Tamriel. The sap it produces is an extremely potent ingredient for skooma, which is why a Khajiit merchant named Urag is posted nearby. The tree fell or grew there, and Tamriel simply accepted its presence, the way a world accepts anything that has been there long enough. What it actually is and where it came from remain unanswered. Section 10. Cosmology, afterlives, and what happens when everything ends. The Elder Scrolls has one of the most complex cosmologies in the history of fantasy fiction. It is worth spending the final section here, in the deepest, quietest part of the world. Fact 99. The stars are not stars. This is one of the most quietly stunning pieces of information in the entire Elder Scrolls cosmological framework. In Nordic and broader Tamrielic understanding, the stars visible at night are holes in the fabric of oblivion, punched through when the Magna Gei, the divine beings who abandoned Mundus during its creation, fled back to Aetherius. The sun is the largest of these holes, created when Magnus himself departed. The stars are the smaller punctures left by his lesser companions. What we perceive as light from distant suns is actually magical energy, bleeding through from Aetherius, the immortal plane, the realm of pure divine essence from which all magic originates. Every night sky in Tamriel is evidence of divine abandonment made beautiful. Every star is an exit wound. Every source of magical power that mortals access flows through those wounds, meaning that the foundation of Tamrielic civilization runs on the residue of gods who decided the world they helped create was not worth staying for. Fact 100. Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, is not simply a nice place that Nords imagine going when they die. It is a real location that physically exists within Aetherius and that the Dragonborn actually visits during the main quest line. It is populated by the actual souls of warriors who died in battle, who are still themselves, who remember their lives, who continue to exist in a state that is not significantly different from life, except that it is permanent and there is always Mead. Shor, the Nordic god who corresponds to Lorcan, and who the other gods reportedly sacrificed to create Mundus, presides over Sovngarde from a throne that sits conspicuously empty when players visit. His champion Sun guards the entry. Alduin's presence in Sovngarde during the events of the game, feeding on the souls there to replenish his power, is a violation of a covenant. Those souls earned their place. They cannot defend themselves against him because they are already dead. The Dragonborn enters to deal with what amounts to a cosmic predator in a space designed for rest. Fact 101. The Dragonborn absorbs dragon souls. This is the defining mechanic of the game, and the defining nature of the Dragonborn as a type of person. But what is being absorbed is not simply magical energy. A dragon soul contains the totality of that dragon's being. Every dragon that existed before the Dragonborn was born was in principle going to exist forever. They do not age. They cannot be killed by conventional means in the same way mortals can. Only a Dragonborn can truly end them, consuming their essence and permanently preventing their resurrection. Paarthurnax warns the Dragonborn about the implications of absorbing too many dragon souls without the kind of meditative discipline that keeps the human element dominant. The concern is not mystical, it is practical. You are what you absorb. The Greybeard's insistence on the Way of the Voice is, among other things, a program designed to make sure that the person doing the absorbing remains fundamentally human in their orientation. Fact 102. Akatosh and Oriel are the same divine entity interpreted through different cultural frameworks. The Imperial Akatosh and the Elven Oriel, the dragon god of time, as understood by humans, and the god of time, as understood by Mir, are both describing the same cosmic principle. Alicia, the slave woman who founded the first human empire, achieved this synthesis deliberately when she established the 8 divines, creating a religious framework that combined human and elven theological traditions to unify her empire. Akatosh was born from this merger, taking aspects of the earlier Nordic Alduin, the Elven Oriel, and other time-related traditions. The theological truth, such as it exists in a universe where theology and reality are not cleanly separable, is that divinity transcends the categories mortals use to describe it. The same principle manifests differently to different peoples based on their needs, histories, and frameworks, and each manifestation is genuinely accessing something real, just through different windows. Fact 103. The first Dragonborn in recorded history is not the player character, and it is not Alessia. According to the Dragonborn DLC, it is Mirak, a dragon priest in the Merethic era, who was contacted by Hermaeus Mora and promised forbidden knowledge. Mirak discovered his Dragonborn nature and began to use it against his dragon overlords, plotting a rebellion. Another dragon priest named Valak discovered the betrayal and confronted him. Their battle was so catastrophically powerful that it literally tore the island of Solstheim away from the Skyrim mainland, reshaping the geography of northern Tamriel through raw, magical violence. Valak won, and Mirak was imprisoned in Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's realm, where he has been gathering power and waiting for someone to come along who might either provide an escape route or be worth defeating. He has been there for thousands of years. When the Dragonborn arrives in Solstheim during the DLC, they are being positioned as the next move in a game that Mirak started in the Merethic era. Fact 104. Heimar's Shame, the word wall at Bone-Strewn Crest, and dozens of other dragon-occupied locations across Skyrim all share a specific structural logic. Each word wall is a monument to a specific moment of human resistance during the Dragon War. The words carved into those walls were placed there by Nords who fought in specific battles, who survived specific encounters, and who wanted to preserve the specific knowledge they had gained through that violence for whoever came after them. The distribution of word walls across Skyrim is not random. It maps the ancient conflict between dragons and men, each wall a marker of a place where mortals proved that the dragons could be resisted. Most modern Nords walk past these monuments without being able to read them. The words are in a language that has been functionally dead for thousands of years. Only the Dragonborn can read them now. Fact 105. Talos, the deified Tiber Septim, achieved his divine status through a process that the lore calls mantling. He became so completely aligned with the nature of a divine being that reality accepted him as one. His ascension is disputed by the Aldmeri Dominion, who argue that humans are not capable of genuine divinity, but his shrines grant actual blessings, which is generally accepted as evidence that divine status is functionally real, regardless of whether the path to it followed conventional rules. The Thalmor's insistence on removing Talos from the pantheon is therefore not just theologically motivated. They are trying to remove a proof of concept for human apotheosis from the cultural memory of the people most likely to try it again. Fact 106. The Blades were originally from Akavir, the continent across the Sea of Ghosts to the east. The Akaviri invasion of Tamriel centuries before the events of Skyrim had the overt purpose of destroying dragons. The Akaviri apparently knew about dragons from their own history, possibly having dealt with draconic threats on their home continent, and came to Tamriel with the specific intention of eliminating them. Their invasion failed as a political military effort, but they succeeded in helping end the Dragon War period. Some Akaviri chose to remain in Tamriel afterward and eventually became the Blades, the dragon hunting order that also served as bodyguards for the Dragonborn emperors. Their distinctive katana-inspired armor and swordsmanship style reflects this Akaviri heritage, and their institutional knowledge of dragon behavior reflects millennia of specifically cultivated expertise. Fact 107. Werewolves in Skyrim, including the members of the Companion's Circle, spend their afterlives in Hircine's hunting grounds. This is presented as a consequence of accepting the beast blood, but Hircine's realm is not unpleasant from within its own framework. It is an eternal hunt, and for those whose lives have been defined by the hunt, by pursuit and prey and the physicality of the kill, there is an argument that it is not a bad place to end up. Hircine himself is not a villain in the Elder Scrolls mythology. He is a Daedric prince with a defined sphere and interests, and those interests are served by his dominion over predator souls. He collected the Companion's inner circle's afterlives through a bargain that was entered willingly, and he maintains his domain with the consistency of someone who takes his responsibilities seriously. Fact 108. The companion's questline has a moral question at its center that the game declines to resolve. Kodlak wants to be cured of lycanthropy so he can enter Sovngarde. Ayla does not. Farkas is ambivalent. Vilkas leans toward wanting the cure, but has not pursued it the way Kodlak has. These are not simply preference differences. They reflect genuinely different value systems about what makes a good death, what kind of afterlife has worth, whether power justifies its spiritual cost. The companion's questline respects both positions without declaring a winner, which is more honest than most games manage. Fact 109. Vampires in Skyrim suffer sun damage not because of simple photosensitivity, but because of a divine blessing placed on the sun specifically against undead. The sun is, cosmologically, a hole left in reality by Magnus. The theological layer added to this is that Auriel, in his elvish aspect, sanctified the sun against undeath at some point in ancient history. The Dawnguard DLC's central weapon, Auriel's bow, can fire arrows that either enhance or nullify this blessing, making it possible to either extinguish the sun's anti-undead effect temporarily or intensify it dramatically. The vampires are not hurt by light generically. They are hurt by a specific divine sanction that was placed on a specific source of light by a specific divine being. Fact 110. The Volkihar vampire clan, Lord Harkon's noble house encountered in the Dawnguard DLC, traces its lineage closer to Molag-Bal's original act than almost any other vampire bloodline in Tamriel. They carry what is called pure blood vampirism, which grants access to the vampire lord transformation and significantly superior abilities compared to common vampirism. Lord Harkon's plan to darken the sun by completing the Tyranny of the Sun prophecy is not simply about tactical advantage. It is about removing the one condition, the divine sanction on sunlight, that prevents vampires from existing on equal terms with the rest of Tamriel's population. His daughter Serana's rejection of this plan reflects her assessment that coexistence, however complicated, is more desirable than the consequences of the plan's success. Fact 111. Cicero's journals, found throughout his room in the Dark Brotherhood sanctuary, document one of the most heartbreaking character arcs in the game, in a medium that most players never engage with. They begin with a normal, somewhat cheerful assassin, completing contracts and recording professional observations. Over time, as the Brotherhood around him collapses and his isolation deepens, the entries become stranger. He starts performing private rituals for the Night Mother, inventing ceremonies that have no official sanction, just to have something to do, some way of maintaining connection to a tradition whose living practitioners have all disappeared. The jester costume appears and is explained. He wore it once for a contract, and it made the Night Mother smile, or at least he believed it did. He wears it permanently now. By the time the player meets him, the journals make completely clear that the apparent madness is the accumulated weight of years spent in complete isolation, maintaining faith in something he could not confirm was still real. He is not dangerous because he is crazy. He is dangerous because he is the most devoted person left. Section 11. Magic, Mortality, and the Things That Last Too Long. Fad 112. The Ogama Infinium, Hermaeus Mora's gift of forbidden knowledge, does not simply grant power. It rewrites the reader. The book allows a reader to instantly master entire categories of skills, compressing decades of practice into a single act of reading. But the knowledge is not integrated naturally. It is forcibly implanted, overriding existing mental pathways to make room for the new information. Reading the Infinium makes you more capable and less yourself simultaneously. The book can only be read once, not because it is destroyed by the reading, but because the transformation it performs cannot be undone. You are not the same person after reading it. Not in the poetic sense, in the literal sense. Mora does not give knowledge freely. He trades current identity for expanded capability. Every reader becomes, in some small but real way, his. Fact 113. Serana, the vampire companion who joins the Dragonborn during the Dawnguard questline, was sealed in her tomb voluntarily. She and her mother Velorica disagreed with Lord Harkon's plan so profoundly that they chose to separate themselves from him entirely. Serana by sealing herself inside a specific location, and Velorica by fleeing to the Soul Cairn. But Serana carries something specific that made her concealment necessary rather than simply precautionary. She is an Elder Scroll, not carrying one, being one. Her blood contains the potential to fulfill the tyranny of the sun prophecy, which is why she was hidden rather than simply killed. She is valuable in a way that required extraordinary measures to protect. Fact 114. The Companion's Hall under Jorrvaskr is connected to specific underground burial chambers that predate the current building. The Harbingers who have led the Companions are buried in these chambers in a tradition that links the current organization physically and literally to every generation that preceded it. Walking through those burial spaces is walking through the organization's history in the most direct possible way, a physical record of everyone who held the same role before. The weight of that continuity is part of what the current members carry. Fact 115. The Thieves Guild's decline before the start of Skyrim's events is directly attributable to the absence of the skeleton key, Nocturnal's artifact. Mercer Frey stole the key from its position as a permanent fixture in the Guild's operations, and from that point forward the Guild's supernatural luck simply stopped. Jobs went wrong, members were caught, contracts fell through. The Guild's membership shrank from a major continental operation to the small, struggling group the Dragonborn encounters in Riften's Ratway. The quest line to recover the key is a recovery of the divine compact that made the Guild viable, and it requires the Dragonborn to make a significant sacrifice of their own to restore the relationship with Nocturnal that Mercer destroyed. Fact 116. Savos Aren, the Archmage of the College of Winterhold, has a secret that the player discovers during the quest line, and that recontextualizes his entire character. As a student, he entered Labyrinthian with a group of fellow students and did not bring all of them back out. The specifics are grim. To escape, he trapped 2 of his friends in the ruins, binding them in place to serve as a magical barrier that would hold back the dangers that would otherwise have killed everyone. Those 2 students are still there, still holding, still bound by the magic he placed on them decades ago. Savos' subsequent career as Archmage, his authority over the institution, his position as the person who speaks for magical responsibility and ethical research, sits on top of that specific act. He has not forgotten it. He has simply continued. Fact 117. The Staff of Magnus, the artifact recovered from Labyrinthian, is not simply a powerful magical weapon. It was created by Magnus himself, the architect of magic in the mortal world, as a tool for working with the fundamental structures of how magic functions. Combined with the Eye of Magnus, it forms a system capable of controlling or potentially rewriting the rules governing how magic operates in Tamriel. This is why the Thalmor, specifically Ancano, wants it so urgently. The staff represents access to magic at a constitutional level rather than an application level. Fact 118. Neloth, the Telvanni mage encountered on Solstheim in the Dragonborn DLC, is several centuries old. His personality, the dismissiveness of his manner, and the casual cruelty of his intellectual assessments of other people's limitations reflects the perspective of someone who has been the most capable person in virtually every room he has entered for longer than most Nord families have existed as recognizable lineages. He has watched generations of supposedly significant events reveal themselves as inconsequential over enough time. His willingness to use others as research subjects without their consent reflects the way his sense of individual lives' significance has been compressed by his extended duration. He is not a villain. He is what happens when a person of substantial capacity lives long enough without maintaining genuine connection to the people around them. Fact 119. The Dovazul writing system was specifically designed to be written by 3 taloned dragon claws. Each character in the language consists of variations of 3 marks, reflecting the physical anatomy of the beings who created it. When carved into stone by dragons, this is simply the natural way their appendages make marks. When carved by humans onto word walls, it represents an act of translation and homage, humans recording in a medium designed for creatures quite different from themselves. The visual distinctiveness of the dragon alphabet, which players encounter on word walls throughout the game, is a reflection of this physical origin. Fact 120. The Greybeards at High Hrothgar have slowed their aging dramatically through mastery of the Thu'um and sustained meditative practice. They are not immortal, but their lifespans are extended significantly beyond normal human limits by the discipline they apply to every aspect of their existence. Arngeir, the Greybeard who speaks to the Dragonborn, communicates in ordinary speech specifically as an accommodation. Speaking in Dove Azul at any meaningful power level risks accidentally reshaping the reality around him with every syllable. When the Greybeards summon the Dragonborn at the beginning of the game, shouting the Dragonborn's name across all of Skyrim, the sound is felt throughout the province. Guards comment on it, Jarls discuss it. Ordinary people experience it as a physical phenomenon. That demonstration of overwhelming power, delivered with absolute precision, using it only for exactly the effect intended, is itself a teaching. This is what mastery means. Not the ability to destroy, but the ability to use the exact amount of power needed for exactly the effect required, and no more. Section 12. The Final Mysteries, Unanswered Questions, and Things Worth Sitting With, Vecht 121. The Khajiit caravans that travel between Skyrim's major holds, always camped outside city walls because they are not permitted to enter, serve a secondary function that is never explicitly confirmed but strongly implied. They are intelligence networks reporting to Elsweyr's leadership on political developments, military movements, and economic conditions throughout Skyrim. They move freely between holds, are invisible to most of the population because their social position as traveling merchants makes them easy to overlook, and have eyes in every major city. Some of them also distribute skooma, using addiction as leverage to build informant networks among the local population. The merchant who sells you lockpicks may also be logging your Jarl's political conversations. Fact 122. There is a Dunmer couple in Windhelm, Ambaris, and Suvaris, who represent the most complete picture the game gives of what 2 centuries of systematic discrimination looks like from the inside. The Dark Elves have been in Skyrim since 4E5, when Red Mountain's eruption destroyed Morrowind and sent a massive refugee population across the border. That is roughly 200 years before Skyrim's main events. Multiple generations of Dark Elves have been born in Skyrim, knowing no other home. They are not immigrants in any meaningful contemporary sense. They are residents of long standing who have never been fully accepted, confined to the Grey Quarter of Windhelm, denied access to the better districts, subject to casual daily hostility from a Nord population that treats them as permanent outsiders. Ulfric Stormcloak, who claims to fight for the freedom of Skyrim's people, has done nothing about this situation. Fact 123. The Dwemer tonal architecture and the Dragon Thuum are related phenomena operating on the same fundamental principle. Both recognize that reality is composed of vibrations and resonances, that the correct sound applied with sufficient precision can alter the nature of things. The Dwemer pursued this through engineering and calculation. The Thuum pursues it through something closer to faith, through a deep understanding of what words mean that goes beyond linguistic knowledge to something more like embodiment. The dragon's word for fire does not describe fire. It is fire. The Dwemer's tonal machinery does not describe the function it performs. It performs that function through the correct arrangement of resonances. Both are accessing the same truth about the nature of existence, through different methods that each believed was the right one. Fact 124. The forsworn Reachmen who wear bone and leather and fight with crude weapons were, within living memory of some older NPCs, a politically organized culture that briefly controlled Markarth through legitimate means. The Markarth incident, referred to in several in-game documents and conversations, was the event through which they lost that political control. Understanding that history transforms them from random enemies into the remnants of a political movement that was denied ordinary options and chose violent ones instead. The specific brutality of forsworn attacks reflects not casual savagery, but the desperation of people who tried political channels, were betrayed in those channels, and are now operating without the protection of any institution. Fact 125. The Nightingales, the Thieves Guild's inner elite who serve Nocturnal, give up their afterlife in exchange for divine protection while living. Upon death, they go to the Evergloam, Nocturnal's realm, and serve her there. This is the actual cost of being a Nightingale. The compact is entered with full knowledge of its terms, but the weight of having traded your eternal soul for practical benefits during your mortal life is the kind of transaction that should make you think carefully about what you actually believe about what comes after. The 3 Nightingales in Skyrim, Karlia, Brynjolf, and the Dragonborn are all operating under this compact. Fact 126. Heimskr, the Talos worshipper shouting in Whiterun's market, was a scholar before the White Gold Concordat's ban on Talos worship took effect. He published theological research. He was a respected figure in the academic study of Nordic religious practice. When the ban made his life's work legally dangerous, he chose to continue in the most visible and public way he could manage, rather than quietly maintaining private faith. Years of being ignored and mocked, and occasionally arrested, have made his delivery increasingly extreme. His sermons are not incoherent. They are structured theological arguments delivered with the volume and persistence of someone who has concluded that quiet reason is not working and nothing else is available. His presence in Whiterun is principled civil disobedience, and the fact that it is annoying is not an argument against it. Fact 127. The skeever population in Skyrim carries a disease called rattles that is not particularly dangerous to adults, but can be fatal to children and elderly people. The game never makes a large point of this, but it is one of those background details that makes the world feel like it actually functions as a world rather than as a setting. Real medieval equivalent societies dealt with endemic rodent populations, the diseases they carried, and the constant low-level attrition of a world without modern medicine. The presence of skeever disease in the background of the game's world-building reflects a commitment to representing the full texture of life in Skyrim, rather than just the parts that are relevant to quests. Fact 128. Festus Krex, one of the Dark Brotherhood's assassins in the Falkreath Sanctuary, is the oldest member of the current Skyrim chapter other than Babette. He is acerbic, deeply traditional, and makes no secret of his contempt for Astrid's management style and the Brotherhood's drift from its religious foundations. His conversations with the Dragonborn, when they occur, carry a quality of long familiarity with institutional decline. He knows what the Brotherhood was and what it has become. His irritability is not a personality quirk. It is the expression of someone who loved something genuinely and has watched it erode. Fact 129. Babette, the vampire child who serves as the Brotherhood's alchemist, is approximately 300 years old. She was turned when she was a young child and has been an 8-year-old girl in appearance ever since. She uses this appearance as a weapon, presenting herself as harmless and sweet to potential victims until she is close enough that helplessness is no longer an option. Her longevity means she has seen more of the Brotherhood's history than any other current member. Her perspective on what the organization has become is necessarily long and comparative. When she speaks with what sounds like a child's cheerfulness, every word comes from an entity who has been watching things get worse for centuries. Fact 130. The College of Winterhold's questline ends with the Dragonborn becoming Archmage. This is an extraordinary institutional outcome. The player character, who has been a student for what may be a very short time, ascends to the leadership of Tamriel's primary surviving magical institution without going through any of the normal processes that would typically govern this kind of appointment. The existing masters are mildly disgruntled but accept it, partly because the Dragonborn has just saved the institution from a potentially civilization-ending magical accident, and partly because the politics of the college in the immediate aftermath of that crisis do not leave obvious alternatives. Mirabelle, who might have been the natural successor, is dead. Savos Aran is also dead. The college has a new archmage who may not fully understand what they have become responsible for. Fact 131. The orc strongholds scattered across Skyrim are independent nations in every practical sense. They operate under the Code of Malakath, their own traditional law system, which supersedes local Nordic authority within stronghold walls. The Jarls of the relevant holds technically claim jurisdiction over these territories and also, practically speaking, never exercise it, because the cost of doing so would significantly exceed the benefit. The orcs do not recognize imperial law or Nordic governance. They are sovereign communities tolerated through the pragmatic calculation that forcing compliance would require resources that nobody wants to spend. This makes the strongholds one of the most honest depictions of how actual political boundaries work in a world without modern enforcement mechanisms. Section 12b, The Quiet Corners of a Living World. Before we reach the final mysteries, there are a handful of smaller facts worth resting on, because sometimes the smallest details do the most work. The Sibyl Stentor, sitting in Solitude's Blue Palace as court wizard, has been advising Jarls for over a century. She is a vampire. Most of the court is either aware of this or has arrived at a polite understanding that the question is better left unasked. She is not malevolent. She feeds carefully and discreetly, and her knowledge of Skyrim's political history, accumulated across several ruling lifespans, makes her genuinely invaluable in a way that significantly outweighs the awkward truth of what she is. She represents a pragmatic accommodation that most people would claim, in principle, to find unacceptable. In practice, nobody with access to her has removed her. This is how the world actually works, and the game is honest about that. The face sculptor Galithil in Riften's Ragged Flagon offers the unusual service of physical facial reconstruction and close attention to her appearance, her pale complexion, her careful positioning in low light, and certain fragments of her dialogue reveals that she is also a vampire. This raises questions the game deliberately does not answer. Does her undead nature grant the precision that makes her good at her work? Is she feeding on patients during their recovery? Does the guild's acceptance of her services simply reflect their consistent pragmatism about the personal lives of people who deliver useful results? The Ragged Flagon is a place where people with complicated histories operate without excessive scrutiny, and Galithil fits that culture exactly. The Gildergreen, the enormous dead tree standing in the Wind District of Whiterun, near the Companions' Hall, died from being loved. This is one of the strangest and most quietly resonant details in the game. Generations of Whiterun's citizens carved their prayers and blessings into the tree's bark, each cut a small act of devotion, each addition incrementally weakening the tree's structural integrity. Accumulated over centuries, the prayers killed it. The tree at the center of Whiterun's spiritual life was literally loved to death by people who never imagined their individual marks could collectively produce this result. The quest to restore it offers two options: cut a sapling from the Elder Gleam in a nearby sacred grove, or convince the grove's guardian to give one instead. The first option is faster and more practical. The second requires understanding what actually happened to the Gildergreen and choosing not to repeat the extractive logic that destroyed the first tree. The game does not tell you which choice is better. It presents both and lets your understanding of what you read in those carvings make the decision. The conversation that Hulda at the Bannered Mare in Whiterun occasionally has with customers about the dragon sightings, her progression from dismissal to concerned acknowledgement to something approaching resignation over the course of the main quest, is one of the game's quietest pieces of characterization. She is not a quest giver. She is not a fighter. She is a woman running an inn in a city that is increasingly in the path of something larger than its defenses were designed for, and she is doing what ordinary people do in extraordinary circumstances, continuing to operate, remaining watchful, managing her reactions, and waiting to see how things develop. The game is full of people like this, people for whom the main quest is something happening to their world, rather than something they are participating in, and the texture of ordinary Skyrim life is carried largely by these background conversations. There is a small farm southeast of Whiterun called Pelagia Farm, where a woman named Wilmuth works the land. If the player spends time in Whiterun and its surroundings at the right times of day, they will encounter Wilmuth going through the rhythms of agricultural life, harvesting, planting, moving between her home and her fields, dealing with the same weather and the same distances, and the same repetition that defines the experience of farming in any pre-industrial world. She has no quest. She has no dramatic history. She is a farmer farming, and the decision to include her as a fully simulated daily presence in the game world is a statement about what kind of world Bethesda wanted to build. Not just a stage for the player's adventures, but a place where other people are living their lives, whether or not the player ever notices. The orc found sleeping in a small camp on the road near Falkreath, a warrior who speaks of wanting to die in honorable combat and attacks the player if approached without care, is an early version of the same philosophical statement made much later by the Ebony Warrior. For some people in Skyrim's warrior cultures, there is a specific kind of death that matters, and all others represent something less than a proper ending. The orc has chosen the road and the direct challenge because the alternative, an ordinary death from illness or old age or something else unmemorable, is genuinely not acceptable to him. His attack on you is a request, framed in the only language his culture provides for making it. The Khajiit lore detail that their appearance at birth is determined by the position of the two moons, Maser and Secunda, on the night they are born, is never directly stated in Skyrim, but is referenced in NPC conversations and in the broader Elder Scrolls lore tradition. Different lunar configurations produce different Khajiit physiotypes, ranging from the roughly humanoid Suthe-rot that players most commonly encounter, to enormous lion-like forms that walk on four legs, to tiny cat-sized variants that are barely physically distinguishable from ordinary animals. The same biological species, shaped by astronomical timing at birth into radically different physical forms. The variety of Khajiit types encountered across Elder Scrolls games is not explained by cultural or regional diversity. It is determined by the sky on a specific night. Section 13. The characters who carry the weight, Fact 132. Esbern, the elderly blade scholar found hiding in Riften's Ratway, survived the Thalmor's systematic killing of the blades after the Great War through caution that bordered on obsessive. He was one of the Order's foremost scholars on dragons and dragon lore, and everything he knew made him a priority target for the Thalmor, who wanted to eliminate all institutional knowledge of the blades and their purpose. He has been in the Ratway for decades, maintaining his expertise in his files, watching the world outside through cracks in his paranoia, and continuing to study dragons in a world that had largely concluded dragons were myth. When they return, he is the only person alive who can contextualize what is happening from inside the Blade's specific knowledge tradition. His paranoia, which the game presents initially as an eccentricity, is entirely justified. The Thalmor were trying to kill him. His vigilance is why he is still alive when everything he prepared for finally arrives. Fact 133. Jarl Balgruuf, the Greater of Whiterun, is the most thoughtful political figure in Skyrim's civil war. He delays choosing sides as long as possible, not because he is cowardly, but because he understands that whichever side he joins commits him to a position that will make enemies of people who are not his enemies by nature. His affection for his city and his subjects is genuine. His decision to allow the Companions and the Dragonborn to operate freely from Whiterun reflects a pragmatic intelligence about where power actually lies in a world where the traditional authorities are fragmenting. He is trying to protect his people through a crisis that most leaders in his position are making significantly worse. Fact 134. Vex, the Thieves Guild's Delvin Mallory's counterpart as the organization's expert on heist planning and lock bypassing, has a reputation within the guild that she does not discuss publicly. Her skills are considered the best in the organization, and she knows it, which gives her a baseline contempt for people who do not measure up. But underneath the professional abrasiveness is someone who takes the guild's welfare seriously in ways that are not immediately obvious. Her investment in the guild's recovery during the questline is not simply professional pride. It is the loyalty of someone who has had nowhere else to belong. Fact 135. Calixto, the seemingly harmless curator of the House of Curiosities in Windhelm, who helps the Dragonborn investigate the string of murders in the city, is the killer. This is available to the player through careful investigation, but many players arrest the court of Wizard Wounferth instead, following the easier narrative path that the surface evidence points to. Calixto is murdering women to harvest body parts for a necromantic ritual to resurrect his dead sister. He is friendly, helpful, and running a public museum as cover. The innocent outsider, the foreign mage who is easy for a xenophobic city to suspect, gets arrested for crimes committed by the pleasant local businessman. The game does not announce this irony, it presents it and moves on. Section 14. The World Below the World. Fact 136. Blackreach contains its own ecosystem that has no equivalent anywhere else in Tamriel. The combination of the artificial sun, the unique geological formations, the water systems, and the centuries of Falmer occupation have created something that would not exist without every one of those specific factors. The Crimson Nirnroot that grows only in Blackreach, the subject of a questline that forces thorough exploration of the entire space, is one expression of this. It grew nowhere else. It required this specific combination of deep soil, diffuse artificial light, and whatever qualities the underground water carries to develop into the unique plant it became. The questline that sends players looking for 30 of them was specifically designed to make sure players actually look at Blackreach, actually spend time in its space, rather than rushing through it toward the next objective. Fact 137. The Dwemer ruin of Erkungthand, where the main Thieves Guild questline's confrontation with Mercer Frey takes place, contains something unusual in its deepest chamber: enormous carved stone eyes. The eyes of the Falmer, the artifacts that Mercer is there to steal, are not the kind of thing that was simply left lying around. They were placed in a specific location that suggests deliberate curation. The Dwemer's interest in and connection to the Falmer they enslaved extended to creating art featuring them, including what appear to be tribute statues. Whether this represents something affectionate or simply the documentation impulse of a civilization that cataloged everything is not clear. Fact 138. The ruin of Labyrinthian, located in the mountains of Hjalmarch, was once the political capital of the dragon cult's theocracy. During the Merethic era, it was called Brumjun-Ar, and the highest-ranking dragon priests gathered there to govern their empire and settle disputes between the draconic territories of Skyrim. The dragon shrine encountered deep within it, displaying the ceremonial masks of the 8 major dragon priests, was the cult's primary ceremonial location. When the Dragon War ended and the cult was destroyed, Brumjun-Ar's significance vanished instantly. The seat of power became a maze of corridors filled with traps and draugr. The scale of the ruins, and the occasional surviving architectural details that hint at how it once looked, give you a sense of how complete the defeat of the dragon cult actually was. This was not a gradual decline. It was a collapse. Fact 139. Forelhost, the ruined fort on the volcanic tundra near the border with Morrowind, was the site of the dragon cult's final stand. In 1E139, a figure named Skorm Snowstrider discovered the secluded monastery and the last significant group of dragon cult loyalists who had refused to abandon their faith despite the cult's utter military defeat. Rather than be captured, this group committed mass suicide by drinking poison together. The dragon priest Ragot led them in this final act. He told them that dying here, on their own terms, was preferable to capture and the erasure of everything they had believed. The Nord forces that breached the monastery found only corpses. No battle, no last stand. Just the decision, executed cleanly. Forelhost is one of the places in Skyrim where you can feel the past in a particular way, a heavy and specific silence. Fact 140. Every inn in Skyrim has a bard. This is not simply flavor. Bards serve as the informal news network of a civilization without mass media. They travel between settlements, trading information for accommodation and payment, and the songs they sing carry current events, political commentary, and cultural narratives. The Bard's College in Solitude is the institutional backbone of this network, training bards in the traditional repertoire and sending them out into the holds. The college's questline, which is less dramatic than most of the game's guild questlines, reveals something interesting. The bards consider themselves custodians of cultural memory as much as entertainers. Their songs preserve history. When Ragnar the Red is sung in Whiterun's Bannered Mare, it is not just entertainment. It is the transmission of a specific cultural memory across generations of listeners. Section 15, The Last 100 Years and What Comes After Fact, 141. The Great Collapse of 4E122, the event that destroyed most of Winterhold, happened approximately 80 years before Skyrim's main events, within living memory of some of the oldest NPCs the Dragonborn encounters. People who were children during the collapse are old adults now. The specific cause has never been definitively determined. The college survived because it is a magical institution, built to withstand magical forces. And the most popular local theory about why it survived is also the reason most Winterhold residents resent it, that the college was somehow responsible for the collapse, and its survival was not coincidence but the continuation of the disaster's cause. This is almost certainly not true, but the emotional logic is comprehensible, and the damage has permanently altered the relationship between the local population and the institution. Fact 142. The Amulet of Kings, the legendary artifact worn by the Dragonborn emperors that was shattered by Martin's septum at the end of the Oblivion Crisis to stop Mehrunes Dagon, had a function beyond symbolic authority. It maintained the covenant between the Idra and the Empire, specifically the covenant that provided a magical barrier against full Daedric manifestation in Tamriel. When Martin shattered it, the barrier went with it. The Daedric princes can no longer fully enter the mortal world the way Dagon did. This is both a solution to the immediate problem and a permanent change to the relationship between the mortal and divine realms. The current empire, the one that exists in Skyrim's time period, lacks the mystical mandate that the Septim dynasty carried. Its authority is entirely secular. Titus Mede II rules through political and military power without the divine sanction that made the Septim emperors something more than simply powerful rulers. Fact 143. The last Dragonborn's fate, your character's fate, is deliberately unresolved. Unlike the protagonists of previous Elder Scrolls games, whose subsequent histories can sometimes be pieced together from later games' references, the Dragonborn's post-Skyrim life is not documented. The Dragonborn DLC's connection to Hermaeus Mora, the ambiguous nature of the ending's relationship to the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, opens possibilities that the creators have chosen not to close. Some interpretations suggest a permanent presence in Apocrypha, studying alongside Mora's other acquisitions. Others suggest ordinary life after the crisis. The one consistent element is that the Dragonborn, whoever they were, left no clear historical record after defeating Alduin. They saved Tamriel, and then, in the annals of history, simply stopped appearing. Fact 144. The Dragonborn DLC introduces the Bend Will Shout, which can compel dragons to obey. Its implications for the broader lore are uncomfortable in ways that the game does not fully address. The Thu'um has always operated on the physical world, moving air and summoning storms and igniting fire. Bend Will operates on minds. It overrides the will of a sentient being. The Greybeards would find this application deeply troubling because it uses the voice to violate something that the Way of the Voice considers sacrosanct, namely, the freedom of beings to exist as themselves. Miraak had no such qualms, which is partly why he was capable of enslaving the populations of entire villages. The Dragonborn having access to this shout is one of those moments where the game grants you power and quietly lets you consider what that means. Fact 145. Hermaeus Mora's realm, Apocrypha, is explicitly described as containing every book ever written, and many that have not been written yet. The prophetic books exist in Apocrypha before their events occur. This means that Mora has foreknowledge embedded in his collection, that the library holds the future alongside the past, and that Mora's accumulation of knowledge includes outcomes that have not yet resolved. His interest in the Dragonborn is therefore not simply about present events. It is about what the Dragonborn represents in the books he already holds. He is reading ahead. Fact 146. The Thu'um was once common. Before Jurgen Windcaller's philosophical reformation and the establishment of the Way of the Voice, the Nordic armies routinely used shouts as standard battlefield tools. Tongues, the title for warriors who had mastered the voice, were valuable military assets rather than rare philosophical practitioners. The Battle of Red Mountain, where a force of Nordic tongues suffered a devastating defeat despite their power, was the event that prompted Windcaller's reinterpretation of the Thu'um. He spent years meditating before concluding that the Nord's defeat was not simply tactical, but a sign that treating reality-altering vocalization as a casual weapon was a category error. The shift from common battlefield application to restricted sacred practice was not immediate. Windcaller had to defeat 17 other tongues in succession to prove his mastery before they would accept his interpretation of why they had failed. What this historical arc reveals is how fragile the Way of the Voice actually is as a cultural institution. It exists entirely because one man was persuasive enough and skilled enough to change the dominant interpretation of a shared experience. If Windcaller had been slightly less convincing, if one of those 17 tongues had beaten him, the entire philosophical tradition that produces the Greybeards, that shelters Paarthurnax, that provides the Dragonborn with their most important mentors, would not exist. The Dragonborn would have arrived in Skyrim to find the Thu'um treated as a weapon like any other, with no organized tradition of its deeper study, no one who had spent centuries wrestling with its implications. The world the player navigates would be meaningfully different, and the tools available to address Alduin's return would be significantly fewer. One man's 7 years of meditation after a military defeat contains this entire downstream consequence. History is, in the Elder Scrolls as elsewhere, constructed from the specific choices of specific people at specific moments, and almost none of those choices feel, in the moment they are made, like the foundation of a tradition that will persist for thousands of years. Fact 147. The Eye of Magnus was buried beneath the first human settlement in Skyrim, which means that the first structure humans ever built in their new homeland was placed, either accidentally or by design, directly on top of one of the most dangerous artifacts in the world. The Night of Tears massacre that destroyed that settlement prompted the entire chain of events that established Nordic civilization in Skyrim. Whether the placement of the eye was coincidental or whether some intelligence guided the first settlers to that location is not resolved. The Elder Scrolls lore allows for both possibilities simultaneously, since the dividing line between coincidence and divine arrangement is not always discernible from the inside. Fact 148. Argus the Bulwark, potential housecarl and follower in Markarth, is one of the most quietly interesting follower characters in the game, not for any dramatic reason, but for a mundane one. He is a housecarl, a bodyguard sworn to serve the Thane, a position that in the context of the game means he follows the Dragonborn through encounters that no rational person would survive. He does this not because he is programmed to, but because he swore an oath and he takes it seriously. In a world full of characters with complex theologies and competing loyalties and ancient grievances, Argus is simply a person who gave his word and keeps it. Sometimes that is the most interesting thing. What makes the housecarl tradition worth sitting with is what it says about the hierarchy of values in Nordic culture. Loyalty to the Thane supersedes self-preservation. The oath matters more than the survival instinct. And this is not presented as foolishness or naivety. It is presented as a form of integrity so complete that it does not negotiate with circumstances. Argus will follow you into Dwemer ruins and dragon nests and Daedric quests, and he will do it because this is what he said he would do. The cultural logic that produces this, the deep Nordic orientation around honor and sworn obligation and the specific weight given to a word given, is the same cultural logic that makes the Stormcloak Rebellion comprehensible, that makes Ulfric's challenge of Torrig understandable within its own framework, even if its outcomes are catastrophic. This is a world where what you promise defines what you are. Fact 149. The Companion's internal conflict over the Beast Blood, the Thieves Guild's debt to Nocturnal, the Dark Brotherhood's decay from religious organization to professional guild, and the college's struggle to maintain relevance against cultural suspicion are all versions of the same story. Every institution in Skyrim is dealing with a version of the question of what it owes to its past and what it is allowed to become. The organizations that survive do so by finding something real to protect. The ones that fail do so by mistaking the form of what they were for the substance. And it is worth naming something that rarely gets said about Skyrim directly. The reason these institutions feel real is because they were written by people who understood that institutions are made of people, and people are made of their choices, and choices always carry costs. The Companions are not simply warriors for hire. They are a family with a curse and a disagreement about what to do with it. The Thieves Guild is not simply a criminal organization. It is a group of people who found each other at the bottom and built a kind of home there, with all the loyalty and dysfunction that implies. The Dark Brotherhood is not simply assassins. They are believers in something strange and specific, and their tragedy is what happens when belief outlasts the structure that was meant to sustain it. The college is not simply a school. It is the last place in Skyrim where a person who cares about understanding things for their own sake can find other people who feel the same way. And the loneliness that surrounds it is the loneliness of being the last refuge of something that used to be more common. Skyrim is not a perfect game. Nothing is, but it is a world, and that distinction matters, and sitting with these 150 facts should give you some sense of how deep the roots go. Power shifts, traditions calcify. People who lived through the founding moment die and leave their understanding behind in documents that the next generation reads without the same context. The Companions remember Ysgramor as a hero, and he was. They do not remember him as the man who organized a military campaign specifically designed to eliminate an entire race, and he was that too. The college remembers itself as a place of learning and discovery, and it is. It does not often remember Savos Aran's friends, still holding in the dark of Labyrinthian for decades. Every institution is the story it chooses to tell about itself, plus all the stories it does not. Fact 150. Skyrim itself, the province, the landscape, is the oldest character in the game. Its mountains were there before the first humans arrived. Its glaciers have carved the same valleys for millennia. Its peaks have been sacred and dangerous and silent and loud with battle and silent again. The word walls in its ruins were carved by hands long dead. The Dwemer cities beneath it were built by a people who have been gone for 3,000 years. The burial mounds that contain ancient dragons predate most of Tamriel's current civilizations. The throat of the world holds a wound in time that was made before the concept of a written record existed. Standing anywhere in Skyrim, even the most ordinary meadow between two holds, you are standing in a place that has held everything the world has given it and is still holding it. The province does not know you are there. The mountain does not adjust itself for the player's convenience. The storm that rolls in from the north at the beginning of the game comes whether or not Helgen is burning, and it came the night before, and it will come the night after. Skyrim as a physical entity has an indifference to the events playing out inside it that is itself a kind of presence. The Dragonborn is extraordinary by any measure the world applies to individuals, and the mountain has seen extraordinary things before, and it will again, and it keeps its counsel. The game is extraordinary not because it invented a world, but because it made you feel what it is like to be inside one that was already there when you arrived and will continue after you leave. The lore is deep because the world required depth to be believable. The details are specific because specificity is what makes a place feel real rather than constructed. Every scholar who wrote an in-game book, every NPC who follows a daily routine, every shadow mark carved into a building wall, every mammoth following its giant on an ancient migratory route, every draugr who has been standing watch for 1,000 years over a dragon that might come back, all of it is a commitment to the idea that a world worth visiting deserves to be treated like a world worth building. When you lay down tonight and let Skyrim carry you off, you are carrying some of this with you. The stars outside your window are just stars, but for a while, in that comfortable space between waking and sleep, they can be holes in the fabric of something, bleeding the light of a divine realm into a mortal world that needs it. The fire in the hearth is just fire, but for a while it can be something spoken into existence, something that is the word, and the word is the thing. The mountain outside is just a mountain, but for a while it can be the place where time went wrong and was eventually, with enormous effort, set right. That is the gift of a world like Skyrim. It gives you other ways of seeing the one you are already in, and that is worth something, I think. Regardless of how old you are, or how many times you have played it, that is 150 facts. 150 pieces of a world that has been carefully, lovingly built over decades by thousands of people, a world that rewards patience and attention, and the willingness to sit with things that do not resolve cleanly. The Elder Scrolls universe does not give easy answers because it was not built to give easy answers. It was built to give real ones, which are always more complicated and more interesting and more worth staying up to think about. If you made it here, through all of it, I hope you are somewhere comfortable. I hope the fire is still going, metaphorically if not literally. I hope something in here made the world feel a little more like the kind of place that has always had more in it than you had found yet. If this helped you sleep, or helped you rest, or just gave your mind something gentle and interesting to settle against for a while, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Like this video if any of it landed. Subscribe if you want more of it. Drop a comment telling me which fact surprised you most, or which one you already knew, or just where in the world you are right now. The world is a big and quiet place at this hour, and it is good to know who else is out there in it. Take care of yourselves, cozy knights. The fire will still be here when you wake up. Rest well.